All right.
I guess we'll share fine.
We have a quorum. This is the Conservation Commission for the City of Northampton for 22nd January 2009. Before beginning the agenda, I'm going to, as the new chair, as I fumble through this role, start with articulating a few things in these first few meetings for all of us, because it would have been good for me, actually, when I first came. First, that this is a volunteer board with responsibilities for the community, largely to deal with the 8 interests as articulated in the Wetlands Protection Act of the Commonwealth, and the tools with which we have to operate are the Wetlands Protection Act and the City Wetlands Ordinance. That pretty much, we also manage some open space and so forth, but that's the bulk of what we do. And comments and discussion ought to be limited to that area of responsibility. I'm going to also try to adhere to a structure where each item on the agenda gets addressed at its appropriate time, as in the publicized meeting agenda. At which point I'll ask Bruce and anyone representing the applicant present information on the nature of that topic, and then ask any public for comments, and then try, and I think this is the proper thing, but I'm testing this with my colleagues on the commission, that at the point when we then entertain a motion to approve, deny something, that closes public discussion and it opens commission discussion. We should not be mixing back and forth those two. We should allow the initial presentation and the public comment, then go to commission discussion. The commission can then ask specific questions if it wants, and thereby bring in additional comments, but that we should separate the public discussion from the commission discussion. And then and some decision whether to approve, deny, or continue, with or without guidance, if deny or continue would be the way that discussion would then be closed. So with that, and I'm going to try to adhere to that, but if my colleagues on the commission have any recommendations for improving on that, please speak up. So first item is the minutes from last time, which Alita prepared and Bruce distributed. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, any changes, people? Paul?
Just on the part about the Nonotuck project, I did mention that somewhere in there, somewhere in the discussion, I mentioned that the project should be moved back 5 feet. And I don't think that was, I read it, it didn't see it in there. I just would ask that would be stuck in there, so that I mentioned it.
Sure did.
That's right. That's why I know. I mean, so this was good enough.
Any other changes to the minutes? If not, all in favor of the motion to approve?
Yep.
Aye. Opposed? So voted. First item, continuation of a notice of intent by Jim Harrity. Bruce, anything to add before asking Jim to...
I received the updated site plan on my desk this morning. I haven't taken a look at it. I distributed copies to everyone, and then the applicant added this page, L101, as an additional revision page. So you should all have a copy of site plan plus this L101.
Mr. Harrity, you want to walk us through this?
Thanks. Based on our last discussion, there were 5 items that were left to be clarified. And one of those was there's covenant language in the bylaws, the association bylaws. Then there was some stormwater issues that need to be worked out with Doug McDonald. We needed to place a marker on the buffer, the 10-foot buffer, every 10 feet. And we needed to present a planting plan, and we needed to move the structure off of the buffer line 5 feet on the back of the house and 3 feet on the side. And so these plans have addressed all of that, except I will note that I do not see the marker. The mark is on the 10-foot buffer line, so that has not been addressed, and I'll just ask that you condition that, and that we can take care of that. In terms of the storm water, we have satisfied all Doug McDonald's requirements, and I'm not sure if Bruce has got any feedback on that, but Doug McDonald is satisfied with, and there were no changes to the actual plan, they were just in terms of calculations, how the calculations were done. And so it was all based on the numbers. But Doug is fine with that, and I think planning is going to, one of the issues was that the pipe along the eastern side of the house was possibly going to drain groundwater. But in terms of our calculations, that's about 18 inches above the high water mark. And what planning, I believe, is going to require from us is that when we dig that trench to put those pipes in, that DPW come in and inspect, and if there is groundwater at that level, then we'll come back, we need to come back with we need to address that so that it doesn't drain the groundwater, which will probably mean we go from 4-inch perforated pipe to 4-inch solid pipe. In that, just along on the right-hand side of that. So planning, I believe, is satisfied with the DPW, with our revisions based on DPW comments.
So Kevin, I did receive a copy of the covenant sent by Jim today. I think with some minor revisions it can be approved. I'm trying to open it now. Some draft language,
Only 2 copies of this.
and it states, it's opening now. While it's opening, I'll also say that I did talk to DPW about stormwater, and both the stormwater manager and myself went through it, and we do agree that there is a possibility, because this is an area of urban fill, that the conditions may be so kind of microclimate based that the groundwater that's on this side of the actual project is at, let's say, 101 feet, and the groundwater over here may actually be at 98 feet because of the amount of fill that's been put in there and the disturbance to the area. So what we came up with is what Jim was referencing earlier, is planning board would condition, most likely, the recommendation anyway, is that planning board condition the project that the applicant, when actually digging the stormwater trench, has DPW on site, and he recommended that for Conservation Commission, the commission add a condition, if approved, that the applicant have a Conservation Commission member or representative on site when digging the stormwater, so that if they do indeed hit groundwater, then they have to redesign and either come back to us or change the actual structure of the pipe itself.
I don't think you should just look for groundwater, I think you should look for hydrologic soil conditions.
Well,
because it can be dry.
the test pit shows that the seasonal high water, groundwater, and the actual groundwater, and that test pit, done by a soil scientist, shows that that it can be done without draining groundwater. It's just that common sense would tell you if groundwater 100 feet away is at 100 feet, it's probably at 100 feet over here.
There's a basement.
However, there's a basement there, and there's been so much fill and alteration of the landscape on this small parcel that it's possible that the test pit showed otherwise.
What's the problem with just putting in solid pipe? Why even mess with this? Just put in solid pipe.
Well, the idea is you can put in a solid pipe because probably you're not gaining much infiltration here anyway. But even a solid pipe, the invert is going to be below where the wetland is shown. So it would be draining water at the invert, groundwater. So it may be that the invert has to be adjusted on site.
And I think, because now we're talking hypotheticals, based on the engineering, everything complies, but the hypotheticals are real. But also, I think that pipe it's like 18 to 20 inches below grade. So it's not like we're 4 feet down or anything.
Right.
So the groundwater, it needs to be, 2 feet below grade over there. So it may be the case, but it's, the reality of this, the common sense will tell you that, we're 18 inches down. We've got like a 12-inch drain and then the pipe underneath that, so it may, and if it is, then we do. Then if there's water there, then we come back and we readjust.
Right. Well, the issue is that there's groundwater within 18 inches on the site at the same grade level. So
Yeah, the test hole that Paul dug.
the test pit that I dug and the test pit that Paul dug showed groundwater at within 18 inches of the surface. So
But we weren't on that side of the building. We were.
right, we're on the other side of the building. Common sense would tell you groundwater is probably at that same level. However,
But the grade is also 3 feet higher over here on the right side too.
I don't think it is. I think
Three.
I don't think it's that much.
The rim of the inlet is at 105, and the hole that I saw was at near flag W5, which is it's halfway between the 100-foot and 101 foot.
100.5.
Yeah.
So it's very close. And it doesn't mean that it can't be adjusted on site and made so that it works. We just don't want someone who's working on the site to just say, well, I'm told that I have to put this at 100.5, and it doesn't matter if it's draining groundwater or not, I'm following some sort of plan.
Yeah.
We'd rather be out there and say, fine, let's make an adjustment right here on site, bring it up 2 feet or 1 foot or 5 inches so that you're not draining groundwater.
Well, I haven't gotten into it much with Aaron, but I don't even know why we can't sheet flow it.
Right, it's not a very big site and it's not a large amount of impervious surface. However, these small retention areas, if you will, are also removing suspended solids. So I think that's why they're sending the water there through pipes.
So I believe that we've satisfied DPW with that inspection condition.
Okay, so what? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but can I read the covenant language quickly? And the covenant language states, all tenants and guests must abide by the no disturb area, change that to no encroachment area, in the wetland and buffer, we can just say no encroachment area, I think that would cover it. The only encroachment allowed is to maintain plantings. The association is to submit an annual report to the City Conservation Commission regarding status of the no encroachment area. If not sent, the city has the right to hire an inspector. All related fees regarding inspection shall be the responsibility of the association. I think that gets the basics. I think that we probably revise the language slightly. And if you guys are okay with the overall kind of concept of this, then I think I can revise it to be in line with some of our other covenants on other subdivisions. I just didn't have time to do that, it came to me today, so.
Okay.
So I guess the the other one that we did was the plantings. And just as a point of clarification, why I submitted that single sheet plan was because today we also, the parking spaces were previously were 8 feet, and we needed to make them 8.5 feet. So we had 5 over here, and we had 6 over here, now we have 4 over here, and 6 over here. And so that new sheet that you have reflects the reconfiguration of the parking spaces only. It doesn't, nothing changed from here back. So I just wanted to make sure that you had the most up-to-date information. And well, as you can see in this hatched area in the back here, this is where we propose to do the plantings from the 10-foot buffer back to the wetland area itself. And that will be with a, I believe, a northeast wildflower mix. That will be the plantings on there.
And what's the distance now between that hatched area and the building?
And so the final issue would be, and just as a reminder, this does not show the markers, which we need to have done. And then the final issue would be the moving of the structure, which we did. We moved the structure, so now it's 5 feet off of that buffer line, and it's 3 feet off on these corners here. And that should show on your plan.
Yes, I was looking at the wrong page, I see.
Okay, I have a question about the planting plan. What kind of details have, and I don't know, maybe I missed it, but I didn't get it, but what kind of details are in there, like coverage for, coverage, amounts, is it seeds or plugs? Will it be weeded? Will it be cared for? How long will it be cared for? How long will it be, is there gonna be an annual inspection by the Conservation Commission? That sort of thing.
Well, so I guess one of the things was, one of the discussions last time was that from the 10-foot buffer back, we just leave it as is. That will grow back naturally, and that will improve the wetland area. But then, Bruce, said that, well, we think we want a planting plan. So it's like, okay, that can work. And, by having it in that area, it will, which is why I put in the covenants that the only encroachment on that area would be to maintain it. So what I'm thinking is we're gonna seed it with these wildflowers and maybe get some ferns and put some stuff in like that. It's gonna take a year or so for it to grow up with some bark mulch in there. And then have it grow. And then it'll be, I'm sure they're not gonna allow sapling to them, but in terms of the maintenance, I think that would be, we could clarify that, would be what the association wants to do in terms of, planting. I don't think you want to put any bulbs in every year, but I don't know if you would allow that or not, or.
So,
But I
are
think that
you
the.
planning on doing this, you yourself or your company, or are you gonna actually hire New England Environmental or somebody? I'm not advocating you do hire them. I mean, just someone who does.
I was gonna work in consultation with the museum people to see what they would think would work, and I know that Craig is in discussions with some other people that may want the live workspace. And so I was going to consult with them in terms of meeting your guidelines, but also creating an aesthetic that they need to live with. And so I think that in terms of improving the wetland area, I think we do that, even if we just left it naturally, that improves it dramatically. Now, leaving the back area to grow naturally and planting in the front, I think we certainly met the ordinance requirements.
All right, so
I just have a question on, at our last meeting, there was some discussion of plantings of shrubs, and I think those serve a number of purposes. One, they actually may reduce year-to-year maintenance two, they form a better physical buffer to intrusion, even in the winter. The shrubs would be there and might discourage people from placing stuff on top of what would basically be a snow-covered expanse. And I'm wondering whether there was a reason for just going with, what just looks like a wildflower and grass mix rather than trying to create a shrub, basically a shrub barrier behind the structure.
It would come down to basically, I would have been determining the aesthetic back there and the expense. I could have done something that maybe they didn't like. And so we left it open, just based on, that's gonna be all bark mulched and with plantings that we come up to a mutual understanding with.
You're gonna have
Hopefully-
signage there as well, right?
Well, the markers will be there
Okay,
that we
right,
don't,
right.
which do not show on your plan.
So now we have bark mulch and those strips.
Yeah.
So we gotta think about this because,
Oh, you're talking about bark mulch in the hatched area?
yeah.
Oh, I thought you were referring to the pathway right next to the building. Uh-huh.
So that, and it doesn't, there's no specification, but when we were talking about, Wisconsin specs for rain gardens, that's what they call for. And that's what I've done in the past where, and that's the rain gardens call for, like 6 inches of bark mulch. But the flow here, this isn't really a rain garden because the flow is not.
Right.
But this is a no disturb area, so.
That's, that's not my area of expertise. And so, which is why I left it like that.
Any other questions of Mr. Harrity before we move to a discussion among ourselves? Any comments from the public? Can I entertain a motion to open discussion among the commission?
I don't think we need a discussion, just move it to discussion, right?
This is closed public.
Well, do we want to close it here?
It's your choice.
But if we close the hearing, there's no back and forth, right?
Well, with
We
Mr.
can
Harrity, there can't be any questions. Fine, don't let my effort to create order get in the way
No.
of decent discussion.
Okay,
It's just a question of whether we want to close the hearing.
let's not, we can always do it.
We can always do it. All right, so one of the big issues is the shrubs. I mean, I certainly would favor shrubs in that area.
Yeah, I'm just looking, there are a number of shrubs that are planted as ornamental. Soapy dogwood, red osier dogwood, high bush blueberry. I mean, these are all a real benefit as wildlife habitat. They're also very attractive.
Right.
The blueberry is going to flower back there. And also in terms of, since a lot of the work that you've done is to prevent intrusion, I think it's so much more effective to have the bushes back there as a physical barrier.
Yeah, but the bee balm grows this high also.
No, it's true. The bee balm will grow up. But the bee balm is also very easy to mow, cut down, and then during the winter, once it's fallen over and covered with snow, there's, there will be bollards or there will be chains back there, but I just don't think it'll be as effective a barrier. And it just doesn't provide the same level of wildlife habitat
No, it doesn't.
and resource.
So, I don't disagree, but I can see that there could be a problem in 35 years or 50 years.
With
Well, you're gonna have trees growing up, so.
no. These are all shrubs. These are shrubs.
Yeah, but
These are
so then, but you're gonna get trees. Look, the whole hillside is covered with trees. So you're gonna get trees growing up in here. And so then, the owners or the tenants or anybody, someone's gonna have to, you don't want trees within 5 feet of your building. And so they're gonna have to go in there and cut down the trees. They may be little things.
Maple saplings.
Yeah, but you're not gonna want. In other words, it's gonna have to be a managed area. I can see this as being, I'm not sure that if we allow this, even with 5 feet, I'm not sure this is gonna be a strict no disturb, hands off, totally hands off. There may not be things stored on it, there may not be people walking on it, having barbecues and all that, but there's gonna have to be some vegetation management. Already, Mr. Harrity had it in mind that it would be mulched.
Right.
And that might be a little bit too fancy for me, but just something's gotta happen in here in 50 years, or over the next decades. It's just, you can't just let it go because it's gonna be a massive jungle. You know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, but I think it's in tension with calling it a no encroachment area. I mean, if the problem is that the no encroachment area is going to be unmanaged, then to me, the solution was to pull the structure back. And if trees grow out of that, if a tree branch grows toward the
Far
structure,
enough away.
just like if it was another property owner, you cut the branch off at the line, at the 10-foot line. I mean, that's, right? If someone had a tree growing next to your house and next to your home lot, and it grew across, your legal right is to cut it off at the lot line. It's not to cross over and say,
Right.
your tree is going to fall on my house, so I'm going to cut your tree down. And I mean, I think in terms of apportioning the property rights,
I got you. I just don't know if that's going to be very practical, but
Because it otherwise raises the issue, what does no
what
encroachment
is no
mean?
encroachment zone?
I know.
A little encroachment is okay as long as it's for good purposes like maintenance, that's a little, that's squirrely.
I know, that's, I know.
Well, Paul has a valid point though, that even if you cut the branches down, the eventual maples or maybe
120-foot tall.
who knows, whatever, they're going to be 100 feet tall, and someone in that house is going to say, one, it's shading my house out, although it's on the north side, so maybe that's a good thing. But it's dropping berries on my house and nuts, whatever it is, it's dropping pine needles, whatever they are, they're definitely going to be issues.
Well, here's an idea, just throwing it out, I'm kind of speaking out, thinking out loud. Maybe you proactively create a large canopy. So you start planting some big trees in there with the expectation that they'll create a large canopy and you'll get essentially a shaded backyard area. And it won't be shrubby, and it will be shrubby for the first 25 years, but hopefully by the 30 years, your trees will be big enough that they'll start shading things out, and then you'll have that.
Well, Paul, the 10-foot buffer is almost completely shaded by the building. I mean, if you look at the orientation of the buffer, the buffer's on the north and west side of the building, which is going to be
2 stories plus
2 stories
Yeah,
high.
so you're saying that nothing will live?
Well, I know, I'm not saying nothing will live, but in terms of a canopy, it's already going to have pretty effective, it's going to be basically below a 20-foot cliff. I don't know that you can prevent, their maple seedlings will end up in there. I guess my issue is that when you build, I mean, if that 10-foot no encroachment line is considered the line that the Conservation Commission is preserving for wetland function, then when you build 5 feet away from that line,
You take what you get.
you take what you get. Just as if you had a house lot in a city and you had a 0 lot line and you chose to build your house within 5 feet and then said, gee, I'm 5 feet away from the line and I really hate looking right at my neighbors, through my windows when I'm making, I think that we shouldn't have to solve, that we shouldn't be in the position of solving the problem caused by the position in the project. That was the applicant's choice.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Now, that's just my, that's.
You just made the argument to let it be, just let it grow.
That's right.
Right.
Why even
That's
do a
cool.
planting, just
That's a good argument, however, the ordinance says in certain infill areas, in accordance with table 1, which says 10 feet, where development includes mitigation measures, that will improve the existing condition of the wetlands or adjacent upland and is otherwise permissible under the Wetlands Protection Act. So this project can be, according to the ordinance, only be approved
For 10 feet.
where the development includes mitigation measures that improves the existing wetlands and or upland area.
So that's improving a lawn area.
So in my opinion, leaving the wetland to grow up is not really a mitigation measure that improves the wetland. I think planting the wetland in the buffer zone are mitigation measures that improve that area. Because building a two-story home next to it is not an improvement, even though the wetland is allowed to return to its natural state.
I'm open.
So I think that, in my opinion anyway, a planting plan is necessary to meet the ordinance itself. And maybe what Downey said makes sense, is you plant the buffer zone with a very tight planting of small bushes, and you hope that those bushes last 30 years and that they shade out any small trees that are trying to come up. If they're planted at the right size, and they're planted in tight groups, then maybe you do get a bush.
I'm not, okay, we're getting a little bit, I'm gonna get a little bit off the topic here. I'm not totally convinced that all wetlands should be off limits and no one should ever go in them, and you can't even use them as visual foci. I think the last thing I'd want to see is someone to come through and plant bushes in a straight line all along here as sort of a vegetative border. Okay? You can put your bushes in there and give it some weight so that there's some sort of demarcation, but I mean, the clever architect or the clever landscape architect will look where the windows are, and they're going to use that backyard place to build a foundation. I mean, that's what you do. You make it sure that the windows are going to look out, and you'll have a viewscape there. Now, I'm not going to suggest that he has to do that. I'm just saying that that would be the clever thing to do. But I just don't want us to say, you got to put a line of bushes.
I don't think a line is.
Okay, well, I don't want him to get the impression that we
No,
are.
that's not, I was not, I was not saying a hawthorn hedge, 10 feet tall, that, will macerate anybody who tries to get to wetlands. No, I mean, I think it's encroachment, it's not a no-use zone, right? It's not a no walking, no observation, it's encroachment in that you don't want people to cut it, dig it, right? Decide that they're gonna, well, I don't really like this particular plant, so I'm gonna dig it up and plant my own annuals.
Right.
Or this is,
Whatever you guys decide on work is, I just would hope that you might consider the expense side of things, because we're working with, this is a non-profit driven project. We're doing this so that we can create this, this non-profit institution up in Florence. So if you could help us with not too much of a burden, it would be helpful.
yeah, I've worked with Rubber Coalition to actually plant shrub islands in Fitzgerald Bay Conservation Area, and I'm aware that these species are expensive, but they've been very effective at creating some shrub islands there. So I think that it's the same sort of effort. It was a volunteer effort. Volunteers came in and planted them. Volunteers watered them. So I don't see how this is not. I mean, this is actually a smaller scale than what they've been working on. It's, you're not talking about hundreds of shrubs, but.
Well, I understand, but another continuation last week, probably added about $4,000 or $5,000 to the project. We got another 3 here. We've got to find ways to make that up, and I just don't know where we can do that. But
It is I guess it's not important. Really, the commission shouldn't be making decisions on your finances, as what it comes down to, and shouldn't be getting into whether or not the building or the units are nonprofit or private. Really, it should be based on the ordinance, and I'll leave it at that.
And it's open to interpretation, as we can see, as to how that's going to occur, and I think we could come up with consensus, no doubt. I think that's just one factor I'd like to throw out there for consideration.
I know, but I don't think it's fair to the ordinance or the people who drafted the ordinance or the actual resource area itself to request that the decision makes a decision based on financial considerations.
No, it's not, but also when you say you can put bollards in, or you can put, you know, bird cages in, that's a piece of information we can use, and this is just another added piece of information, that's all.
It's okay, he can say it.
Whether we want to.
Yeah. Just want to put it out there that in the past, we've had this discussion and we've decided that the commission's not going to take financial consideration into a legal decision based on an ordinance and a wetlands protection act.
So, I'm gonna try to say this without hurting your feelings, Mr. Green. It would make me feel a lot better if you were able to either hire or find someone who has had experience in native plantings and was able to, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to have a lot of fancy graphics or anything, but at least write down, you know, just maybe putting in some foundation plants, whether they're shrubs or whatever, and where they might be planted, and how long they're going to be watched, how long they're going to be taken care of, what, you know, just plan that sets a course of action so that we can see it.
Well, following up on the discussion from the last meeting, that the concerns were, unless they're, even with signs or some signaling limit, that after a period of living there, you know, the canoe's going to end up upside down for the winter. The charcoal grill's going to be, you know, people are going to use the space around where they live, and if there's something, and I think what Paul's suggesting, and Downey, that if there's something that obstructs that it's clear that this is not lawn, this is not yard, this is something else, then that increases the odds that it doesn't require monitoring to keep it there.
So I'm not suggesting that, you know, if there's shrubs planted, that they have to be planted across the entire open space necessarily.
No,
You know, I'm just suggesting, Donnie had a good suggestion of, you know, shrub islands just kind of placed.
That's fine, because one of the reasons why I thought the flowers would look, because I am concerned with the aesthetic. We want it to look nice. And so we're taking that information, and we want to make it nice, and also unencroachable. And so we can do that. What I would ask is if you would approve this plan with a contingency on submitting a more detailed planting plan. And I believe a couple weeks ago, even Bruce said that, you know, that you could help us with that. And so, but we will go out, we'll get somebody to come up with a plan that I believe will satisfy what you're looking for.
And there's nothing wrong with flowers or grasses or whatever.
Sure.
That's not what I, you know, so.
I'll work in close consultation with Bruce, and we can go back and forth, and we'll get somebody that comes in, that can come in here and do a nice job for us, and we can have it done.
I would prefer that somebody be hired to do this. I don't have time to go back and forth on the planting plan. I gladly would submit a list of
Yeah, we can certainly provide a list of plants.
plants that are acceptable, but honestly, I have too much going on. And part of that too much is enforcing encroachments on projects similar to this. So to add to this, I'd like to say that I would recommend that the commission require large boulders 2 feet on center across the entire no encroachment zone, such as the 4 foot large boulders, 4 foot diameter
2 feet in
boulders,
center or 2 feet space?
2 feet apart across the, because, and I think these can be obtained for free, that there are places such as the Pat Melnick's project He has tons of extra boulders up there. He told me that he's looking to get rid of them for free, anyone who can come pick them up.
Sorry.
That I think 2 feet keeps people from mowing, and it creates a border. And I made the same recommendation on a project that we'll discuss
Right.
later. I think that because I've spent a huge amount of time going to these projects now that we started a couple years ago at 30 feet feet apart, and then we went 25 feet apart. Now we're at 15. I've had enough. I've had enough of sending enforcement orders to people and having them deny them in the mail, and then have it come back to me, and then having to send one certified mail, and then have them deny it 3 times before I have to issue someone to deliver a subpoena. And then, this is a huge waste of time for someone who's mowing down a wetland that
Yep.
is what begins in the process as a fair kind of negotiation, but then turns into, it gets sold to one person who gets sold to another, and people no longer respect that line. So that would be my recommendation, that the 4-foot diameter minimum every 2 feet apart across the entire rear line of wetland, 10-foot no disturb, to the back of the property, or around the corner to the bend anyway.
Can you reduce the size of that a little bit? Not the 2-foot part, just the 4-foot diameter part.
I prefer not to, and I'll show you a picture of another project where we asked for 2-foot diameter ones,
You got more.
and I have a picture of my shoe next to it, and my shoe actually is about 2 inches longer. And I know I don't have 2-foot long feet. I have big feet, but they're not that big. So I prefer to say 4-foot in diameter. Large boulders, they can't be moved. You can't pick them up. You can't roll them out of the way and mow the wetland. And we're talking long term. This is a beautiful design, Tris. I think this is a very nice looking barn. I think it'll be there for hundreds of years. But I prefer to see those boulders be there for hundreds of years as well.
How does that affect the shrubbery, the shrubbery issue?
I think the shrubbery grows next to boulders.
Okay.
So we don't need the shrubs to prevent the encroachment.
I think the shrubs are to meet the ordinance that says
Right, improving the-
mitigation measures must improve the existing conditions.
But you're right, you wouldn't need only shrubs to create the barrier if you have other means of creating the barrier.
So can I ask, you guys were on the design part of this?
Yep.
Yeah. What would you recommend?
You don't want to know what I would recommend.
No, I do. You
No,
could say
I would
not.
recommend
Given
that
this.
don't push it back 5 feet, because the building, to be marketable, has gotten worse in size. The units have been devalued, and a row of boulders is gonna look, to me, not very attractive. That's my opinion. But what I would put up, to keep people off, would be something like signs, or the bollards, or,
You do a 4-foot high stone wall with small areas underneath to allow amphibian or reptile movement, I guess. We've done that before as well. That seems to be an option.
Like a white picket fence.
Well, a 100-year white picket fence would be difficult to find. I mean,
We could put it in the association bylaws that it needs to be maintained, the annual inspection.
the thing is that that's all fine and dandy, but what happens is somebody just decides to cut it down or move it or take it out, and it's happened on almost every negotiation we've made in the past since I've been here, 4 years. Almost every single one. There's one that I can say that there is not a single encroachment, and that's Pat Melnick's new project, and it has boulders all the way around it. And that's the only
and
one.
I think that looks ugly.
No, once it grows in.
Well, I mean,
Have you been back there? I think it looks ugly.
there's the option, you can put a stone wall, or you can put boulders, or,
How about,
what else lasts
But
100
if we're
years?
trusting that the covenants are enough to require one type of behavior, why not also this type of behavior, other than that you've been burned before?
I mean, you could have a split rail fence, or you could do
how about a 2 foot wide, high, and not a stone wall, but the, trying to think of the name of it, the precast stones. Where you put those in there, and then we just let it grow up naturally behind that.
It's your decision.
Paul's decision is the best, split rail fence. Looks antique, it looks like a barn, looks like a farm, and it could be named, you could make an ordinance that if it rots, it has to be replaced. It's easy to maintain.
I'm just saying
It
that
would look nice.
Paul
look nice.
isn't out doing
And you
the
don't walk through.
enforcement every day, so,
Yeah.
I mean, this is.
But I thought it would go
Well,
with
well,
the.
what would
with
you
the-
think, what would you think of Bruce, if the fence is not maintained, that the commission retains the right to replace the fence and
At the
and
owner's
bill
expense.
the owner?
Right, and you put it, that's great, but you're putting the onus on yourself.
Right.
So now you're saying every year, we're going to inspect, and if it's not correct,
Right.
we're going to, one, we'll probably notify you. And then if you don't respond, we'll notify you again. And then if you don't respond again, we'll notify you with we'll have to go out and find somebody who will do the work, and then we'll get some sort of, estimate. And then we'll notify you with an estimate.
Right.
And then if you don't respond again, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. I mean,
But what
it's
are,
really a lot of
what
work.
if we looked at this covenants language to require all the recognition of owners and members that they will not, and nor will guests or tenants, encroach on land? And what if incorporated into that, there was the maintenance of a fence of some description?
What if you put up a bond, or not a bond?
We have that with Cardinal Way. We have a covenant that says there's a 75-foot no disturb area. And there will be granite bollards placed every 25 feet along this 75-foot no disturb. And what we have is, we have smashed granite bollards that are sitting in the mowed wetlands. That people have smashed the bollards, threw them back in the woods, and then mowed all the way up to the edge of the woods, where mowed down all the wetland vegetation. And so now what we have
Is there a
is,
shed there too?
and there's a shed sitting in the middle of the wetland now. And what we have is large grass, and my letters that I sent to them saying, you don't have the right to do this. And them coming back to me saying any letter that comes from the city is refused in the mail, refused. Just
How about a mound planting? Where we create, like a 2.5 foot mound, and we plant all along there, with some shrubs. And, so you probably have like a 4 or 5 foot wide mound that goes 3 feet high, and we plant that.
Yeah.
And then up behind it, we just let it grow naturally.
it's not my decision. I'm just saying, this is my job when I go out.
Yeah.
This is what I see. So, and the boulders work in the places that we put them. Large boulders placed close together, and you can get Goshen stone, or you can get natural stone. You can get some places you can go and just get boulders delivered, and natural looking boulders.
I understand your frustration, I can hear it. But I think that I don't think it would look good at all. But I think a mound planting would accomplish the same thing. Now, that's not going anywhere unless you get a bulldozer in there to get rid of it. You can get rid of it'll be the same amount of work to get rid of that mound planting as it would to get rid of the boulders.
This is a registered area.
Right,
Yeah.
well, it's gonna be tough to do that, although that's a good idea for some. Alright, well, I'm gonna put a plug in for, even though Bruce, he's gonna call me tomorrow, he'd chew me out. Put a plug in for a split rail fence and a covenant inlet. And maybe even some money for the maintenance of the fence, some fence maintenance money, I don't know. Because I think it would work a lot better than boulders like Pat Melnick's project.
Paul, what you're doing right now is you're charging the citizens of Northampton for a project that is going to benefit a few. The project entirely will benefit many. The condos will benefit a few.
Yep.
And what I'm saying is, I think you're charging the future citizens of Northampton by moving forward with something that can be removed and is going to require a lot of maintenance. What if what you're also saying to the condo association is you have to maintain this fence, because what if the condo association chooses not to maintain the fence and it rots and falls down? So then would the commission have the right to say you're not properly maintaining the fence, and who makes that decision? Or do they have the right to say, the fence needs to be replaced and it has to be exactly the same? Or, what if the condo association says, well, we would like a 1-foot fence and it to be, different. I think you're really, my position has already been cut down to 3 days for conservation, and there's no time for this, and there's no one else out there doing it.
We've got 5 minutes before we gotta move to the next
Let me
topic.
just say one thing about is if I was to put in there an industrial building, and we could probably fit like an 8,000 square foot industrial building with garages underneath, met all the zoning requirements, site plan only, no special permit, then I can understand we throw a line of boulders along the backside, wouldn't make a hill of beans difference. And that would have been the most economical benefit to me. That would have been the one, that would have been my first priority from a monetary standpoint. Steve came up with an excellent idea, and I bought into it in many different levels. And I think that, I like the split rail fence because it fits. It's the aesthetic, it works. There's a covenant in there. We've got responsible tenants that are working on it. And I just think, I think the split rail works the best.
Is the museum a member of the condominium association?
Yes, it is. And that's why this was, and I mentioned the first time also that the reason why this was attractive, because it allowed me to kind of practice this model where we use these development tools for the common good. And so if we could have gotten 5 units in there, that would have been dandy. But also, when you're trying to do nonprofit development, you run into the same issues as for-profit, density issues and cash flow and financing and all of these things. And so we had to come up with a way where we could get this done. It didn't work with 2, but it works with 3. And so we went, okay, we'll do 3, and we can get this thing done.
How about granite posts?
Steve wanted to say something.
Is it possible I could just have one little point? The Sojourner Truth Statute Committee, which is another group of the Committee for Northampton, which will be the owner of the Ruggles Center. That's our 501c3. Our mission is to maintain the park and statue up there, and I feel like it would be not much of a stretch for us to also agree to maintain, even in a written form I know it doesn't solve 50 years down the road, but it solves for a while that we would also work to maintain that split rail fence or anything else that has to do with what your committee comes up with as the best border that goes there. That's separate from the condo association, the committee, the Ruggles Center and the committee and the statute committee would agree to maintain that to make it look good and keep it sound. I just wanted to say that. I'm sure we'd have no problem.
So
How about granite posts?
Like I said, it's your call.
I know. I'm talking your direction, but I'm really talking about what.
I think we're designing a plan, which is what we try not to do.
I know.
Well, we sort of started it that way.
Well,
It's my fault. It's true.
so what do you think?
What's that?
I'd have to lean towards the boulders.
And I feel more optimistic than Bruce is. probably because I haven't had the same experiences, but also because in this case, we have multiple entities committing to maintenance of a fence. So I think that we could provide guidance and have a relatively high level of confidence that it would be respected. What might happen in 100 years is very difficult to worry about. But I think for the foreseeable future, we could expect that there would be a responsible effort to comply with what we request. So a split rail or some other aesthetically consistent but undeniably visually present limit seems reasonable to me. So, can we get a motion to try and nail down what it is we're really ready to vote on?
Well, these are really conditions, right?
Yeah,
These are
they can
conditions.
close the hearing then.
Okay,
Downey, probably.
It is different. It is different from a purely private project in that there is the museum involved, and that the museum is going to be there as a public actor for a longer time. I'm extremely sympathetic to Bruce's points in that an ordinance is really only as good as the enforcement. If the police pull no one over on the Mass Pike, then there is no speed limit. If they have no power to do that, I think that systemically there needs to be the wetlands ordinance, and the commission has to grow some bigger teeth in terms of not forcing Bruce to go through multiple iterations. Fines need to be higher, and they need to be instituted more quickly. But that's something for down the road. But it would apply to this project if 2 years from now the ordinance has been modified. I prefer something that is more permanent than the split rail fence, just because the effective life for the split rail fence is 20 years. 20 years at the outside, and wet soil probably less. Granite posts. Again, I would rather have the architect come up with a solution.
yeah, I know.
With a solution than.
So we can put that into the condition. We can
But
just
it
say.
needs to be something with a lifetime of at least 50 years for me. I'm looking for a lifetime without maintenance. So whether that's steel, whether that's heavy chain between granite posts, something that we don't, because again, even with the best of intentions, pure neglect will allow all wood fence to disappear.
And just, 2 weeks ago, I think that the commission was okay with the 10-foot concrete, the concrete ball is every 10 feet, because that was the guidance that we came back with. So any improvement out of that is a bonus if we, and certainly open to that.
Okay, so how about if why don't I make a motion to close the hearing?
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Oh,
Okay, so we have to come up with conditions. Are there any conditions that you want to make sure that we include? That you want to make sure?
I think I've expressed my concerns.
No, I don't mean about about the edge, but is there anything else that, besides the
Well,
edge?
there's the covenant, that's the annual inspection.
Right, so, how do we want to, you said you wanted to tweak it, and that's okay, but
Yeah. Just,
it's
accept
just a covenant.
a covenant that
It'll be-
requires an annual inspection.
So
And
I'm building a
inspection
motion.
and report to the commission.
And report to the commission.
Okay, and the planting plan,
yeah, what about the planting?
Again, that's up to you guys how you want to condition of planting plan.
Or do we wanna give them a certain amount of time to come up with one?
I think you need to specify what type of planting plan you're looking for. I thought that was kind of what was done at the last meeting, but I guess, like,
But it seems like the discussion that we've had here today was that the planning plan needed to include some shrubberies structurally significant enough that it doesn't all die back in the winter. Other than that, it could be mixed grasses, flowers, and so forth, so that it's, but of native species. A list of which we could provide, but the plan is something that the applicant needs to develop.
okay.
And if you want to condition that where, you know, certainly, you know, before building permit is issued,
Yeah, something like that.
have a
Yeah.
plan in place before a building permit is issued.
And it should be approved by the commission.
Right, you know, hopefully we have that for you,
Yeah.
for the next meeting.
And is that a planting plan for the buffer zone and wetlands, or the buffer zone only?
It's a planning plan for the, since it's yard, it's a planning buffer zone
And wetlands.
And wetlands.
Is my assumption.
which isn't to say that everything has to be planted. It's just,
Right.
it's just that
What we're gonna do.
a good planning plan to me would, you know, wouldn't see that boundary. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, so,
Okay,
did you get this?
Any other
This is gonna be a
conditions?
motion, I don't wanna have to do it all over again. Alright, so now we have the boundary.
so we have the covenant, the planning plan,
Snow storage, I think, is important, that snow isn't stored within the,
Oh, yeah.
because it looks to me the easiest way to plow would be to push all the snow back to
yeah.
the wetland, basically.
Jim, what were you planning on doing with snow?
On the sides of the buildings, the couple areas up in the front there, and then it would have to be removed if it got unmanageable.
so just make that as a condition, no snow storage in wetland or buffer area.
Yeah.
Well, if you said or buffer areas, you take out almost the entire parcel.
Good point.
They can't store snow anywhere.
10-foot buffer.
Right, the 10-foot buffer, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Store it anywhere, not- Fine,
Well,
that's fine.
We're probably gonna end up removing it. I mean, it's, yeah.
there is an issue though with storing it on the west side of the building. Then the meltwater from that pile of snow, which is contaminated with salt, silt, is going to flow into the wetlands. If I'm reading the contour correctly.
That's correct.
So that should not be an area for snow storage. If I'm correct in,
What we've done in the past is you could take that contour and slightly change it into a bowl.
okay,
And then if the snow is stored there, the contaminants and the sand sit in the bottom of the bowl, and you would create a covenant or a condition that says that bowl must be cleaned when it reaches X inches, or when it's no longer a bowl, I guess.
right, this is similar to the gas station on Route 10 that we were talking
Exactly.
about. Okay, I would add a similar condition that the snow storage is going to take place
Doesn't have to.
where any place where the wetlands are down gradient of that snow storage, that they have to create.
I think you should stick 2 giant rocks right on the side there.
Yeah, oh, well, yeah.
Because
that's,
it's-
okay,
As you talk about creating work.
Right,
vendors.
no, that's fine.
Jeez, I
I'm fine,
mean,
as long as,
no one's gonna pay attention to where they put their snow. The guy who hires, who plows, he's gonna plow.
okay,
So,
so place 2 4-foot diameter boulders.
boulders at the west,
2 giant rocks.
I would
West
say
front corner?
it should be bigger than that.
Oh, like as big as this chair.
All well, my four-wheeler that has a plow on it
Yeah,
would
pushes
move
it
this rock.
Well, all right. I'm just saying that, you know, if you don't want snow stored here, I can't believe they would do it anyway because it's too close to the building. But if you don't want snow stored there, then put two big rocks there and just leave it as something.
Although if we put the two big rocks on the back side of the building, so, you know, you can store some there
No,
with the bowl.
well,
Because of the drain. Could you do it now?
yeah, I mean, that's the problem, is that you need to alter the grade there, because that 100-foot contour looks like it's draining north.
And I don't think, and actually you could condition it where, because from the house, from the structure to the street, it's all flowing this way.
If that's the final grade, then that's,
To, you know, to alter this back here, to have that come this way, we could do that also.
Come which way? I mean, towards the road?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, fine.
the 101-foot contour is right in the middle of that circle that's shown on your plans at the west end of the building. That is, and then there's 100-foot below it to the north. So basically that half of that area, those contours, and those contours are outside the buffer zone, so presumably they could be adjusted, but as it's shown on the plan,
It's
then
gonna drain back
half
to
of
the
that pile is gonna be carrying salt water back into the wetland, year after year after year after year. So,
Seems simplest just to have Paul's two big boulder idea
Yeah.
at the front west corner of the
and
building.
just
Then
remove
they
the
won't
snow.
plow.
Yeah.
And it won't be too bad.
And just no storage on that end.
Then after your second storm anyway, you're gonna be removing it realistically with the way that's laid out.
Or losing a few spots.
Other conditions?
Well,
To get that one, Olivia, about the boulders at the front west corner?
how about the boundary? Leave it up to the designers, but there should be a permanent, a boundary that's expected to last between,
At least 50 years.
however you want to do it.
50?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You mean like a plastic fence?
Well, if we're leaving it up to the designers, are the planted mound that Jim was describing, is that enough of a barrier?
We already got
I
that.
don't think so.
Makes a nice bicycle jump.
Certainly.
So it'd be something more, I just want to provide
I guess-
guidance enough
I guess-
that this is not, we don't end up with something we don't want.
I
Well,
guess
but we can
here's
turn
the
it
issue.
down too. I think he knows kind of what
We've
we're
already placed a condition for the planting plan, requiring approval by the Conservation Commission before the building permit is issued.
Okay.
So you're already, to a certain extent, still coming back to us with that.
Come back
Same
to us
thing,
with a good
same thing
idea.
applies with the fence. That the fence is conditioned on that it's 50 years without maintenance and allows no vehicular access, right, including lawnmowers, right, small vehicles, and that it's subject, just like the planting plan, to the approval of the commission. So if you come back and it's something that's not substantial, then we're likely to say it's not substantial. I mean, you've sat here and heard all the concerns, and you've asked for flexibility in order to make it attractive and increase the value of the units by making it attractive. And you're the architect, you know the materials, you know maintenance better than I do, and so I think that
We'll come back with a plan that I think could be satisfactory.
Okay.
Any other conditions?
There's the on-site requirement for stormwater removal, for the stormwater construction period,
Oh,
that a commission member or a representative should be
Oh,
on
yeah.
site when they're digging
Trenches.
the trenches for stormwater, so that they don't, if they do hit groundwater, then modifications must be made.
yeah.
What else?
Anything else? Can I get a
The usual
The standard.
standards.
conditions.
1 through 32?
Yeah.
So we have a motion, including all of those.
That was your motion.
Yes.
wasn't it?
Well, I was
Yeah.
getting it down, yeah, I move that project be accepted with conditions as outlined.
Second?
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So voted.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure.
Next item, continuation of the notice of intent filed by Tofino Associates in Northern Avenue Home.
Sorry, thank you.
All right, thank you. This is the 6:30 scheduled agenda item, continuation of a notice of intent filed by Tofino Associates in Northern Avenue Homes. Bruce, you want to say anything before we ask the applicant?
You want to, talk about
Yeah,
this?
at the beginning of the meeting, this is my first meeting as chair, and as I move into this role, announced at the beginning of the meeting that the Conservation Commission is chartered to address the interest areas, 8 of them, as articulated in the Wetlands Protection Act of the Commonwealth. And the tools that we have at our disposal are the Wetlands Protection Act and the City Wetlands Ordinance. And that the discussion in the area of responsibility, I mean, we have some area of responsibility for acquisition of open space and so forth, but for the most part, our area of responsibility has to do with protection of those interests as articulated through the vehicles of the ordinance and the Wetlands Protection Act, and that our discussions, our decision-making has to be limited to the use of those tools. So if at a later time I ask that we limit our discussion to things that are relevant to those tools, that's why.
Could
So-
you read those for us?
The 8 interest areas are the protection of public and private water supply, protection of groundwater supply, flood control, storm damage prevention, the prevention of pollution, the protection of land containing shellfish, protection of fisheries, and the protection of wildlife habitat. Those are the interest areas as articulated in the Wetlands Protection Act of the Commonwealth. Mr. Cole?
Okay, so the plans were revised with an eye towards minimizing impacts in the 10 to 35 foot buffer zone and meeting the requirements for extraordinary mitigation, which after the public hearing on December 11th, it was clear to us that mitigation had to occur on site. The amount of work that was originally proposed within the 10 to 35 foot buffer zone has been substantially reduced. The numbers are from approximately 17,000 and some square feet to about 7,000 and some square feet in terms of the work between 10 to 35 feet, not including the bioretention basins, but not including any extraordinary mitigation measures within that zone. The large detention basin behind units 22 and 25, which is here, has been removed from the 35-foot zone, placed closer to those units. The grading for the large detention basin is almost entirely outside the 35-foot buffer. It is outside. There's an exception for the portion of the grading that connects to the bioretention basin over here. So if there were no bioretention basin, then this overflow into the detention basin would also be eliminated. The small detention basin adjacent to Unit 3 is now gone. Its associated piping and outfall structure have been eliminated. It's been replaced with a bioretention basin, which we'll discuss in a moment. Behind units 3 through 13, there were dry wells that were within the 10 to 35 foot zone. Those dry wells have been removed from the 35-foot buffer zone and placed outside of it. And grading in this general area, has, as well as other areas, has been reduced and taken outside, or taken outside the 35-foot buffer zone. We're also proposing on-site mitigation that improve the conditions of the buffer zone and extraordinary mitigation to restore, expand, and enhance the wetlands. Specific things occurring are: invasive shrubby plants within the buffer zone will be removed and the buffer will be restored with plantings of native species with high wildlife value. That's occurring pretty much all along the edge of the buffer zone. But the next thing I want to mention specifically is outside the edge of the detention basin will be some additional plantings in that regard. In this area right here, there is a substantial stand of Japanese knotweed that we intend to eradicate and restore this area. This will entail cutting the knotweed and having a licensed applicator drip herbicide onto it, into the cut stems. The protocol would need to continue for the course of a year. Knotweed is very hard to kill. The disturbed area would then be restored with densely planted native shrubs to provide shade to prevent the reemergence of the knotweed. Again, the bioretention basin here replaces the originally proposed detention basin adjacent to Unit 3 for improved water quality. We're getting 90% TSS removal in both of the sections of the site where we're having bioretention basins. That's this section here, as well as the middle section here. So that's well above DEP standards. The basin itself is outside the 30-foot buffer, 35-foot buffer, and grading around the basin goes up to the 30-foot line. The outfall pipe is located under the existing path to the rail trail and ends 15 feet from the wetlands. The existing path would be realigned in that area to be further from the wetlands, and the trench for the pipe would be restored with native plantings. The side slopes of the bioretention basin will also be planted with native species. A second bioretention basin is located between units 13 and 15. This is the one we've looked at previously. I'd like to emphasize that the majority of the structure is located on existing lawn. So what we're doing is we're taking an area that is now presently lawn and turning it into something that will have both habitat value and TSS removal value. In addition, we're planning on going in and cleaning, as we said we would before, all the trash and surface debris from the wetland area. Another area where we're doing vegetative restoration and improvement is in the wetland right here. There is a large, dense thicket of multifloral rose. We intend to use something along the same protocol as we did for the knotweed to deal with that area that's thick with invasives and replace it with densely growing wetland shrubs that will hopefully over the course of time crowd out the multifloral rose after they've been located. The area of the wetland restoration in total is 1,588 square feet. Then we're also constructing 2 new wetlands. One is in this area here below the detention basin. It's approximately 2,800 square feet. It will involve not just the usual meadow grass plantings, but wetlands, shrubs, and vegetation, native and chosen for their wildlife value. Another wetlands replication area will be placed over here in an area where the current path runs through to the bike trail. And I'd like to speak to that as the last area of mitigation for the moment, which is that we would like to take the existing path that goes both through the wetland and the upland areas from the end of this parking area here and move it. It now goes through 2 wetland areas here. We'd like to move it to the upland areas adjacent and take those areas that have the bike path or the footpath in it presently, take out the asphalt paving that's in those areas and replace it with suitable soils and revegetate with wetlands plants. So that we would call a restoration of the condition of the wetlands, and take the bike path and make it more of a real trail, 4 feet wide, paved. It gets people out to the bike path so people can still go through that area, They have easy passage, but they're not trampling through the wetlands on a regular basis.
But that new path would be within the 10-foot line.
That new path does go closer than 10 feet in places. There's a section there where you can't get, you've only got about 20 feet between
Right, I see
the
that.
two sections.
Doug, we have a larger mitigation plan, bigger scale that might show it better.
You wanna go to the orange ones, or you wanna go to the?
It's not the orange ones, it's the.
Oh, okay. That's all right.
I can hold this up if you want to point this out. This is diagrammatic.
We basically color-coded everything separately here. Again, these are the bioretention areas. These are the plantings, native plantings around the edges of the yard and in the areas where there are currently invasives and a fair bit of just shrubby, unwanted vegetation that really doesn't have the same value as what we would plant. These dark areas are wetland replication areas, constructed wetland areas. We're not replicating because we're not removing any wetland. We're simply adding wetland to the total. These two areas here are where the bike path goes through the wetland, and we will be moving it out of those two areas. And in this area here, you've got the knotweed in the purple, and that bluish area there is where the multifloral rose is. All of those areas have really a monoculture of those two particular items. There are no other trees or shrubs, for that matter, being removed as part of that process. Any questions on this plan? You want to bring up that?
Yeah, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, just a visual on it.
This is before.
The other one actually is a good point. You can do both. That's fine. First plan that we had, the orange area represents the area between 10 and 35 feet where there was activity and disturbance.
Just to point out, the two red lines, hope you can see, indicate the 10-foot offset from the wetland and the 35-foot offset. That
This
was
is the
the
current plan.
original proposal.
That's the current plan.
The majority of it is the bioretention basin over here.
And then the other plan is that section up by Northern Ave.
In that location, the back of the building is pretty much right on the 35-foot line due to its dimension. So there would be some obvious grading that would infringe on the 35-foot zone. And most of that grading there is just to provide some backyard, a little bit of flat space out back before it slopes back down to existing grade.
Those houses have to be back.
Because of this setback.
We've pretty much left everything at minimum in terms of any house that was, really, every place on the site, we're dealing with minimum setbacks or within 1 or 2 feet of minimum setback.
I think that's the only location where we're right at 35. I think Doug wanted to keep the other building was 31 to 32 feet. Give a little, play versus adhering to that 30-foot line.
What is the minimum setback in that zone?
30 foot? Is it?
30
Yeah,
foot
30
for
feet.
a townhouse.
The townhouse is
And
30
it's on
feet?
any side.
It's
Yeah.
actually, yeah, it's front
Front
side
side.
and rear in this case for a townhouse.
And the house is 30 feet
To the.
in
yeah,
length?
I
It's,
think I'm more like
See what
36,
you're
maybe
looking
20.
I think they're 36 or 38 feet deep.
Okay, I get 38 on the far end. Okay.
Including the
about 22
porches.
wide.
So Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Just one minor small clarification. Doug has been calling these bioretention basins are actually technically a rain garden to be in strict conformance to the performance criteria and design criteria as stipulated by DEP and the stormwater manual.
Okay.
Commissioners, any questions?
So is the bike path, did I read it right? Is it supposed to be bituminous?
It is bituminous. We had, actually, originally we were thinking we'd do something like wood chips or TRG, and then when I talked to Bruce, he said you should pave it so that you don't have, long-term maintenance. Like you don't have to keep going, adding gravel or wood chips every couple of years.
Yeah. My recommendation in the staff report, so everybody knows, is pervious pavement
Right.
or pavers, pervious pavers. And I think that is a much better option than putting TRG that washes out in heavy storms and washes into wetlands and needs to be maintained often.
The TRG is?
TRG is trap rock gravel. It's what you see on a lot of these driveways, a mixture of larger rock with smaller stone dust. And it ends up compacting to be almost as hard as or impervious as pavement. It's pretty close, and I think even in your stormwater calculations, they're almost identical.
Is the bike path a little bit of a misnomer? It leads to the bike path, but it's a footpath.
Well, all
It's a
right.
foot- it's an everything path, yes. I mean, my concern with pervious pavement in that particular condition is for the cost of it and the difficulty in putting it in. And it is difficult. You've got to dig a whole lot deeper to put in pervious pavement than you do to put in solid pavement. How much are you really gaining in terms of water just shedding 2 feet one way or the other and back into the ground?
Mostly, I just want to make sure I read it right.
As well as maintenance associated with permanent pavement, pervious pavement. You've got to get in there.
Other questions from the commission?
So your contractors to remove the invasives think that 1 year is adequate, even with the knotweed and the rosal flora.
We didn't mind the notion of a longer term, 5-year was Bruce's suggestion, maintenance plan.
Okay.
We were basically saying we're gonna take 1 year, we're gonna kill everything that comes up, and then we'll replant.
Right.
And presumably, yes, a longer term plan would be in order.
Yeah, just everything I've seen on even stem injection of herbicides for the Japanese knotweed, 80 or in the 80% level for 1 year. So I haven't seen one that's going to get it all. So I would think it would have to be a longer protocol.
If you take off the top
Reasonable.
12 to 18 inches of soil, get most of it. That's the recommended removal.
I just
Right.
mentioned about multi-floor rows. I mean, it's very effective to dig out multi-floor
Right,
rows,
you-
but that would be at the discretion of the commission because it would be digging in a wetland as
On
opposed
every-
to buffer.
From a lot of information I've heard with knotweed is even if the roots break off and you're liable to have that happen if you're digging them, then those pieces also.
Oh, one centimeter vegetative material will sprout a plant. So most of the protocols call for covering the ground during removal to collect anything that comes off. The other thing in terms of a long-term protocol is that the seed bank is going to be impressive there, so that even if you killed all of the vegetative plants, you'd still have it bouncing back pretty quickly if you just walked away in a year or two. So, and of course that's where the plantings come in very important.
So could you remind me again too, bioretention basins, what's their maintenance? What kind of maintenance do they need after they're installed?
Well, I guess they're pretty much self-maintaining. There will be an occasion where you have to remove the top layer of topsoil. and replace it on a periodic basis. I mean, there are sediment traps before that, so they're not there to trap sediment and hold sediment, they're to treat the water. Essentially, you send fairly clean water to it, and essentially filters through the topsoil and the soil beneath it for cleaning the water. Those are there for cleaning purposes, not for stormwater retention, and not for accumulation of sediment. So after a while, the vegetation will be grown up to have to maintain vegetation. On a periodic basis, you will have to remove that topsoil and replace it.
Can that be done if it's planted? So in other words, it has to be maintained, sort of mowed, or at least mowed once a year or something, so you don't get trees.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So that's,
In terms of cold weather performance for those, are they in a period of with frozen ground and snow and then rain on top of snow, sort of a peak flood event for the Northeast? What kind of performance do those turn in?
I would love to quote you an exact number. I can't. I mean, we have designed those according to DEP standard criteria for the BMPs of those structures. I mean, there's proprietary systems which are concrete structures underground. In general, plants and soil do a better job than hardscape engineering project. But I can't tell you specifically how it works. And typically, the TSS removal rate is an average over a year. It's not an exact removal rate for a particular situation. You want to think about your average TSS removal. So in the summertime, you'll probably have 100%. In the wintertime, you may have less than that. But the annual TSS loading is the criteria that you're trying to comply with.
Do you have any numbers or even? I mean, obviously it's an average number, and that's what the regulations call for. But in terms of performance during the winter,
I do not have that number. No.
Okay. As far as long-term performance, I was just reviewing publication by New Hampshire's Stormwater Management Center. Okay, and saw that they had basically 2 generations of these bioretention basins, and the first one that they tested failed hydrologically after a fairly short time, and that they had moved to a second generation. I was wondering whether you had on these bioretention basins that you've constructed, do you have long-term follow-up data on how they're performing now, 5 years out, 10 years out?
These here, again, the new stormwater regulations came out January 2nd of last year, and they had very specific guidelines for BMPs which were acceptable to DEP, and each one of those BMPs which are acceptable have very, very specific design criteria and design guidelines, and that's exactly what we followed here. I don't have specifics on the performance data on this particular BMP, other than we followed the exact, to the nth degree, the performance and design criteria from DEP.
The detention basin down at the southwest corner looks to have from the bottom to the top of the highest contour something like 3 feet, 3.75 feet depth. And I'm having a little trouble visualizing this. When we walked out there, it was all snowy, but this takes stormwater from not only from the bioretention basin just above, but from parking lot and other areas around the project, it appears. And is there an estimate for in a rain of a certain amount, how much depth would be created, how much overflow would end up settling in there, and how long it would last?
Yeah, that's very clearly calculated. We look at it for a 2-year, 10-year, if we want to, a 25, 100-year storm. In each one of those scenarios, we calculate exactly what we anticipate the depth of the water in a pond to be. And then that's how we actually size it to make sure that it has the capacity to hold a 100-year storm without overtopping.
Can't go past 92, right?
Right, there's an emergency spillway, and essentially we have, the pond fills up, and we essentially have I'll call it a drain in the bottom of the pond. It releases the water at a controlled rate to the pre-construction flow conditions. and we have it staged, so different storm elevations, or different storm events, the amount of water released, the rate of water release is equivalent to the pre-construction scenario. And then the basin is designed so that even in a 100-year storm, we're still not overtopping the dike. There's emergency spillway for in case we had a 500-year storm or something happened. If there's a breach, we have a location that will be able to sustain it in a safe manner. And a pond, again, it's not designed to exceed the capacity right now.
Is there a way to estimate the number of days when there would be standing water in the pond over the course of an average year?
Again, it depends on the frequency of the rainfall. It's designed to drain out within a short period of time, 24 hours or so. After the rainfall, it will be dry. It's not designed to hold water for an extremely long period of time. So it depends on the frequency of the rain. It's not going to be standing water for a long period of time after rainfall. It's not a pond, it's a detention basin.
Thanks.
So Mark, if you, I know you guys did a test pit there and I looked at the test pit information, but if you were to dig it at that point and you were to hit water, this happened at the state hospital, and it went from a dry basin to a wet basin, how would you deal with it at that point?
Well, if we encounter groundwater, two things happen. One is the outlet, it's going to seep in at a certain rate, and then we have the outlet control. So the water that seeps in is sort of a lot different scenario than a storm. The rate of water that would seep in would be less, and the outlet is down low. So if any water did seep in, it's going to leave. It's not going to fill up the basin, so that it's not able to accommodate the rain when it comes in. So the basin will stay dry even if we did encounter groundwater. I don't anticipate groundwater being, we have wetlands here, we have a basin here. I don't anticipate groundwater being higher than what the wetlands are that close and that adjacent to it. But if we did encounter it, the water drains out, the rate it inflows is much less severe than what you have in a rain event. So the basin will be essentially dry. There may be a half inch of water in there before rain if we did encounter it. And also the groundwater would tend to equalize itself out.
Right, and would say if the commission were to condition it to say it had to be a dry basin, could you, within the site design, possibly expand the size of it so that it's maybe not as deep but wider, so that you're not draining groundwater or having a wet basin? Is that something that could be done within this site, on this site?
I'm assuming that we could, yes.
Okay.
Nothing's an engineering impossibility.
Without encroaching towards the wetland area, yes.
Without enclosure.
I mean,
Okay.
You would shrink
That's-
the yards towards the house.
That's
Right.
the main concern. On other sites, we've encountered this where, a test pit shows one thing, and then on site you get all of a sudden you get water, and then you have mosquito problems or.
I mean,
So
an
on and so
extreme
forth.
scenario, if that were, I'm not anticipating it happening, extreme scenario, if you think about the basin, we slope into the basin at the bottom and then it comes back up.
Yep.
If we needed more capacity, essentially a slope basin coming into it, we can make that a vertical wall and gain that additional storage area and raise the bottom of the basin to accommodate it. So there is an engineering solution should that happen.
Okay, and there's room to do that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Would access for maintenance of the detention basin, and looking at the plan, would that be around the west side of Unit 22? That to be permanently left open? Is that within the covenants, or how is that handled?
We hadn't thought about it. Good question. We'll think about it and handle it. I thinking the covenants is the right thing to do. It is common property there. It's not a exclusive use area for any one unit.
And are you intending that the areas of constructed wetlands constitute extraordinary effort and therefore justify moving from the 35 feet to within the 35 feet in those areas where you still do?
That is what we're saying. It's an unusual time when we get constructed wetlands without having destroyed wetlands. I think that's, if there are
Well,
other
it's-
suggestions for what we might do on site, we ran out of ideas and we felt that was a very good one. And we found 2 suitable spots. It really seemed to work quite well.
And those spots were chosen because of there are few trees or native shrubs, and it was relatively small disturbance to
Right,
to the
and
actual.
a relatively low grade
Well,
relative to the wetland. There are trees in the larger of the 2. The ones that we're taking out are exclusively the Norway spruce.
And so the reason this other area that is, I guess, the more obvious of the areas it wasn't chosen is that it had larger trees and
A lot of trees, it's very
dense.
large,
and the vertical difference in.
and the ground was high.
The ground was higher, and frankly, taking the trees out of there presented issues in terms of staging the project and perhaps damage to other, vegetation in the wetland, just trying to fell them in a narrow way to get them out of there. That was our first thought, was, okay, make this wetland, round it off. It makes sense, but then you go there and you realize it really doesn't make sense.
What about this area up here? This other inlet? Was that? Like that?
Well, it's right at the base of.
Bruce, could you actually point out what you're pointing to, because we all can't see.
Sorry about that.
So you can point it out on the board.
What I was discussing is that so the commission can see too, that the constructed area, proposed constructed wetland is here.
No, that's the bioretention.
I'm sorry, here. And this seems like the more obvious of the places, because it's just an upland island surrounded by wetland. Without any topo lines, it's hard to tell what's there, but apparently it has some vertical difference in grade and a lot of trees. So this was an area of less disturbance and fewer trees and shrubs. I was also asking about this area that juts in here. It seems like an easy replication, or I guess not a replication, but it might be a restoration. I guess I'd have to see the area. I haven't been out. I guess I have been out there. I just don't remember that area.
It would be, because there's a steep grade there going down to it, and that would make it difficult to access.
That area is actually not, I think that flattens out there, but that is when you actually start getting in toward the wetland species, like more native things like red maple and things like that occur in that area, starting at the base of that.
Within this area, which is basically pretty much edge wetland, so,
Yeah,
I mean,
and,
okay.
It's almost functioning as a wetland as it is anyway.
okay.
Just had another question about the bioretention basin, or rain garden number 2, and its location. Just in looking at the plans, there's a large area that's specified as being loam and seed, that's between units 7 and 8. It's actually, most of it looks to be outside the 100-foot buffer. And it would both remove the problem of having that bioretention grading outfall within the 35-foot zone, as well as none of the grading would be within that zone.
Well, if it were there.
If it were there.
Yeah.
The only difference I can see is that the grade is significantly higher there, 101 versus 98.25 at the edge of the buildings. So it would be a deeper depression, more excavation, but not.
We couldn't get the water to go there. We thought that was the best spot for one.
Okay,
Retention
interesting.
was, yeah.
Actually, because the infiltration capacity of that soil is really good too,
Yeah.
but it's too high to actually get the water to go
Get
there.
anything
Right.
from
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
So you'd be looking to store snow there.
Exactly.
That
So
was one of the spots.
Would you create some sort of large bowl so that the sand sits in there?
Hadn't thought of it, but certainly could.
I think we've pretty much conditioned that on most of our projects this last year. Yeah, it's not, nothing deep, I mean, it's 3-inch large bowl basically,
So
and
it
that,
settles out.
yeah, it's scooped out once every 2 years and 3 years, and at least it all sits there and infiltrates.
So is your goal to keep the snow from ultimately ending up in the
Whatever.
detention basin? Are you the train that goes?
Right, so basically all the sand sits there and then hopefully the water infiltrates. It, you know, maybe some of it flows off, but the majority of the sand and sediment sits in that bowl and then gets cleaned up.
With that in mind, let me ask about a couple of other spots, because this will come up with planning, whether it's, we certainly found spots that were outside the 100-foot buffer, but since they do most of the water on the site ends up in the detention basin eventually, at the end of unit, between 15 and 16, both sides of the street, behind, next to 16 on the back, that ultimately goes into a swale that goes overland. At the other end of the building, it ultimately goes into a structure that does go to the detention basin. Would you suggest that if we were going to do that, we create the same kind of basin there?
Absolutely.
They're pretty much already there.
It's already
We
there.
already have
The
it.
grading
They're
is-
kind of swales, in the lawn areas anyway, so those are very likely good candidates
Sure.
for snow storage.
And it goes into a storm scepter too.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure,
The only-
basically acts as the same. Right.
Yeah, the only concern with snow is that, well, I guess this is my next question is, I think that there was a commitment, I'm not sure whether it was in a letter or whether it was a previous suggested condition on the use of salt or chemical de-icing. Obviously, since none of the stormwater management techniques remove salt or chloride, and that this would be a cumulative effect over a long time, that it's something both that it's good to see the commitment not to use those, but as again, thinking how is that going to be enforced, 20 years down the road? Or I mean, obviously, it would be almost impossible to prevent residents from buying a bag of chemical de-icer and pitching it on their front stoop. But in terms of the larger areas, what consideration have you given to preventing that? Basically enforcing the commitment to not use
Yeah.
salt or chemical
It's going to
de-icing.
go in the declaration of the homeowners association. The requirement, you've got to hire one snowplow contractor to do the job that does it for the whole association. Everybody doesn't get to choose to do their own driveway or not, and then you could make that part of that, which would certainly memorialize it. How you got beyond that to a greater level of enforcement, I'm not sure. I'm open to suggestion, because every covenant gets better as we hear it. That's something to do.
What if you had an annual sign off by the board that was delivered to the commission? At least that puts somebody's name on it.
Or maybe just give the contract, like the plowing contract, to whoever's doing that to the commission and have something stated in there that no chemical de-icers will be used.
I think that would work just as well.
Salt,
Yeah. Chloride.
you want chloride.
I mean, it's the organic alternatives, I think, like urea, or those increase nitrogen loading. So they're not, nitrogen is something that is taken out by the treatment chain, but the addition of any sort of agents is problematic, especially if the treatment chain all ultimately basically concentrates that outflow in the final detention basin.
Go with the organic beer mash is the newest too. Works quite well.
Sounds like physical removal is the best.
To an extent. Yeah.
Other questions from the commission? We can come back when we get into our discussions. But for now, let me ask if there's comments or questions from the public. And there's a lot of people, so let's try to not do too much duplication and stay focused on the areas of responsibility of this commission, which is the Wetlands Act and the ordinance. All other aspects about what may or may not be a good job, a good idea, are beyond our area of responsibility. Any comments? Sir, can you say your name so the reader can record it?
Sure. My name is Jim Nash. I'm the Vice President of the Ward 3 Neighborhood Association. I live in Ward 3, on the far side of the ward from this project. I also have a cold, so.
I know the feeling.
So, the Ward 3 Neighborhood Association has been trying to look at this project and trying to digest it in a way that we can bring it to the membership and to have the Northampton community actually talk about it in a way that we're less at loggerheads. And, you know, as we're going through the process right here, you know, this right now it's kind of a legal thing that, you know, Doug's making a proposal, you know, and he's looking at what you guys will legally let him do, and you guys are looking at the areas of interest up there. And what we met recently, we did an outreach with membership, and we tried to frame our discussions in terms of sustainable Northampton. And that while it doesn't, what we pulled together doesn't exactly relate directly with that, I think it, in terms of sustainable Northampton as a policy that's coming down the pike, I would just like to read off the questions we have that relate, and I'm going to make it amend things a bit here, so it just relates to green space and wetlands, pulled from the proposal. The thing I do want to say is that our biggest concern is the overall lack of sustainable language in the process right now. I think it's hard for all of the citizens who are concerned about the project. I think it's hard for the developer who's trying to put a proposal on the table, and we're tied up in all of this mishigas right here. So I'll read you the amended version I have right here. And these draw from specific objectives within Sustainable Northampton itself. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm hoping that by us using the language of the plan, which we're moving towards implementing within the next 2 years with the new zoning regulations, that we can have a different type of discussion. Does the proposal eliminate valuable green space? Is the proposal low impact? Does the proposal respect the boundaries of wetlands? Does the proposal affect areas of high ecological value or endangered plants or animals? Will tree canopy in this urbanized area be lost? Are there any ecological resources, water linkages, or wildlife corridors affected? Will the proposal's impact on the environment be offset by increases in public infrastructure? And the last question, which kind of tied them all together, has to do, how specifically will the proposal change the overall quality of life for citizens in the area and for the city? And that's really, how can we bring it back to that answer? And I'm hoping that by using this process that is coming down the pike, and maybe actually starting to use some of that now, that we can change the tone a bit and move forward.
Thank you. Sir.
Yes, hi, I'm John O'Niger, and I come in before you all as a ecologist and a biologist, and a former Conservation Commission staff and agent for the town of Palmer, and currently work for Regenerative Design Group in Greenfield. So my comments are addressing the interests of the Wetland Protection Act, and specifically whether the proposal as written meets the requirements of the Northampton Wetlands Protection Ordinance. And I would submit to you that, that the proposal doesn't show that it has met the requirement for extraordinary mitigation, that it has highly or beyond highly likelihood of altering the wetlands in a negative way. I know you all know the Wetlands Protection Act intimately, but there is in the Wetland Protection Act a 100-foot buffer zone, and that's sort of been lost its teeth over time and isn't even in part of this discussion. And there's a 50-foot buffer in the town's ordinance, and that's sort of been lost in the discussion as well. The requirement being mitigation, and so now we're down to this requirement for extraordinary mitigation to meet the 35-foot buffer, and the proposal has substantial activity even within that zone. So I would submit that the commission really look closely at that, and it's within your purview to really draw a line, since this is a new ordinance and is going to set precedents for projects in the future. So I'm just going to address several specifics. Specifically where there is not improvement, the proposed activity of clearing vegetation within the wetland, I think, is a disturbance within itself. You know, there's a lot of words, a lot of talk about these species, these invasive species, but the reality is, and biologists will tell you that they are providing functions. They're providing wildlife habitat. They provide cover. They provide food. And so the proposal to go in and be cutting out and then use of herbicides within a wetland, and which will have to be extended as the discussion brought out. It's not going to be just 1 year. There's a seed bank. The plants will come back. They'll swamp the tiny little plants that are planted, and there's numerous there's studies now and numerous examples of mitigation projects, planting projects that have failed because, you know, after some time the developer walks away, or the people living there don't know what happened, and a lot of unsuccessful projects. So that's just within the wetland. Within the buffer zone, there's also a loss of habitat. The mature Norway spruce that are there that are moderating the climate. They're buffering the wetland as it is, and so there's not a lot of discussion about the loss of that habitat, and the replacement will be very tiny shrubs that will be many, many years before they even come close to replacing the habitat that's lost. Within the buffer zone also is a lot of the building activity, lawns, some of the homes. There really is not any green space designed in, and what the obvious result that can be seen again and again is that the homeowners will push outward. The planting, you can't see it in these drawings, but in the previous one where they were green, it's the green edge around the blue line, specifically 3, 4, 5, 6, those units there. Those homeowners will quickly cut those bushes down. They'll be expanding. That's the only place they have to go to create a lawn, to create some space for themselves, a picnic spot, a swing set. There's no space for the community, and they will eventually end up having effect into the wetland. They'll be putting leaves. They'll have fertilizer use, herbicide use. So those are effects that will happen, and there's no way to write that in. So there's a discussion about the de-icing, trying to put that into the homeowners association. The likelihood is very minimal over time for those kind of effects to be mitigated. The mitigation areas are small. They're really ecologically ineffective and also prone to failure, similar to the plantings that I already mentioned. those very small, unless there's the commitment to come back and care for the plants, there'll be a lot of all the other species plants growing up around them. And then I'd also like to point out the hydrologic changes. I don't think there's the stormwater effects that have been discussed. The groundwater issues I don't think have been thoroughly looked at. The discussion I think about the high groundwater table and the detention basins, I don't think that was answered completely. That the groundwater is high there. There's a lot of water issues. The neighbors are having water issues, and so the effects of this fairly intensive development on this small piece of property, the hydrologic issues aren't completely understood. I would recommend that the commission looks at hiring a hydrologist, to bringing in some outside expertise to look more closely, specifically at the groundwater effects of this intensive development. So I think that was pretty much it. So I just encourage the commission to press harder and not accept the assumption that this proposal meets the requirement for extraordinary mitigation.
Definitely want to second that
Sure.
Thank you. My name is Alan Seawald, I'm an attorney, and I've represented municipalities now for 23 years. I was Amherst Council for 19 of those years, and I have spent a lot of those years dealing with code enforcement and permit enforcement. In 20 years, no one in this room will be in any way associated with this project. And in 20 years, everyone at this project, everyone who lives at this project, everyone who does anything at this project will not have been at these hearings. And this is all very earnest now. Mr. Darnold's an excellent engineer, and he's right, he probably could engineer a solution if the people 20 years from now know what we know and know how important what we know is, but they won't. Okay? I have spent my career dealing with violations of restrictive covenants and subdivisions, violations of special permit conditions, violations of orders of conditions, because particularly in condo projects, it's controlled by the owners of the condo. Mr. Cole, as good a developer as he may be, won't be maintaining these structures. He won't have anything to do with these structures. And the owners who run these condo associations have dual interests. Or maybe they only have one interest, and that is in keeping the marketability of their units up. And to keep marketability of the units up, you've got to keep the condo fees down. Because when fees and assessments soar, people don't want to buy them. And when you start having to maintain all of these structures over and over and over again, year after year after year, digging out these basins for the snow, making sure this detention basin is clear, making sure that there's no de-icer salt being put on these roads, okay? It doesn't work because they have no economic interest in doing that. They have the exact opposite economic interest in not doing those things. So that detention basin is going to end up being filled with silt, with leaves, with sticks and dirt and everything else, and it's not going to function 20 years from now. And when you think, and so I would suggest that the only thing extraordinary here is the density of this project. The only thing extraordinary here is how close everything is to the wetland. That's extraordinary. This is shoehorning way too much, way too close to the wetlands. And when I was here last time and I argued the legal issues around the 50-foot no encroachment, the 35-foot line, Mr. Meyer mistook what I was saying for arguing only about those lines. You have jurisdiction to move these things back. You have jurisdiction 100 feet from the wetlands. And you should exercise that jurisdiction because this is too much, it's too close, and it's too complicated for people who have economic interests against maintaining these structures to depend on maintaining them. And so I've written dozens of restrictive covenants. I've written lots of them. I've given them to my clients to read, and they come back with their eyes circling in opposite directions because they don't know what they just read. They have no idea what these things mean. And that's who populates condo associations. They're not lawyers, they're not wetlands biologists, they're not conservation commissions. They're people, and they don't know what these things say, and they never read them because they're really complicated. And Mr. Cole's getting more and more complicated every time he writes them up. They get more complicated. So, as a academic engineering matter, Mr. Darnold may be exactly right, but in reality, this is not going to work. And you have a letter from Brian Windmiller from Hyla Ecological. I would ask that that be considered very carefully by the commission, because it explains exactly why, as time goes on, the wetlands are going to get damaged. I'm not a scientist, but I have a sense of human nature. And if you build these many units this close to the wetlands with no yards for kids to play in, no place to, for things to be stored, the natural progression is to move out from the unit into the buffer, into the buffer, into the wetland. That's what's going to happen 20, 30, 40 years from now when none of us are around. And so if you want long-term stability of these wetlands, you have to tell Mr. Cole to move out away from the wetlands. It's too many units. There are no basements. There are garages. So everything's going to be stored in garages. Where are the cars going to go? I mean, these are the kinds of issues that are presented here. But I would suggest to you that it's unfair and improper to require the city of Northampton to be the policeman of the no ice on the roads, no encroaching out into the buffer zone, no encroaching out into the wetlands. Somebody's going to have to be monitoring this, and it's not going to be the condo association, I guarantee you that.
Second time I've heard that.
That's because it's true.
Bruce just chewed me out.
Other comments? Sir?
I'm Adam Cohen. I want to present to you that letter from Dr. Windmiller. I emailed you all, and Gloria got one too, I think. This is the formal copy. So I hope you, I don't know if you have any questions about it or if you want to go into it, but it talks about the replication issues, a lot of the issues that have already been mentioned here, and goes into them in some detail with scientific references. I would also like to present these materials, enter them into the record. This is the Castell 1992 study of wetlands buffers, use and effectiveness. And basically the major point here is that buffers that are less than 50 feet are simply not very effective at protecting wetlands. And I think we heard earlier in this hearing from Bruce, that enforcement's a major problem, compliance is a huge problem, and I think it perfectly echoes what that study is saying about when you have these very narrow buffers, and here you have a lot of people right on top of that buffer. This is the Planner's Guide to Wetlands Buffers for Local Governments, surveying what's going on across the country. Again, this is an outlier nationwide. This is very close to the wetland. Connecticut River 5-year watershed action plan from Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, where they ask Connecticut River Valley people to not put impervious surface within 50 feet of streams because of these runoff and pollution issues. About that. From USGS, water quality trends in New England rivers during 20th century, showing past several decades Connecticut River getting more and more salty, which we infer as people applying salt to roadways. Well, medical news today, Roundup highly lethal to amphibians, finds University of Pittsburgh researchers. So we have toxicity issues with all this herbicide that's being proposed to put in and around the wetland. Here we have the author here, Mike Kirby, writing about Meadowbrook, where, getting this right, about a third of it is built within 50 feet of a wetland, and they've had a lot of essentially I would say, flood control type issues with moisture intruding into the homes, mold issues in the apartment. You know, I'm not sure that's exactly your purview, but I'd like you to be aware of it. There are safety issues there. We have, correct me if I'm wrong, I think local regulations say that the depth of these detention basins needs to be about 2 feet below elevation. And then I think state regulations want the water table, seasonal high groundwater, to be about 2 feet below that. Now we know from a lot of the test pit data, some of these test pits are saying seasonal high groundwater is 18 inches below the surface. So my concern is there's very little space there to execute these detention basins properly. And what I'm concerned about is we're going to get a situation like, again, I'll quote Mr. Kirby about in Carlin Drive, where, talking about a detention basin there, they simply scooped out a hole in the swamp bottom and called it a detention structure. Today it is just a pond, and a stagnant, smelly one. It was designed to have a dry forebay and a shallow main chamber. It was supposed to have only about 6 inches of water in it. This was supposed to be a compensatory wetland full of cattails and wildflowers. A rock check dam was supposed to hold back the first flush off the parking lots and trap pollutants. An outflow from it was supposed to feed the wet part of the detention pond. Here, rainwater pouring off the new parking areas and street was supposed to be stored and discharged safely. That was the plan. Today, if you stand by the pond and look down into it, you'll see the check dam is now about 2 feet underwater. You can't even see where they planted the marsh grass and flowers. The area is underwater. Even in a fairly dry summer, the detention pond is only about 1.5 feet from the top of the bank. There's no storage to speak of, no discharge, no filtering. As it's constructed now, gray water from the parking lots and the access street goes directly into the swamp and the Connecticut River. So I think if that happens here, it's more serious because there's quite a few more people close to these structures than there are in Carlin Drive. You have mosquito control issues. You also have attractive nuisance issues. There are cases around the country where children have drowned in detention ponds. And as Alan mentioned, there's not a lot of space to play except in the no disturb zone, the wetlands itself, and the detention structures. So I'm concerned you're setting up a dangerous situation from that point of view as well. I also have here, these are a few more letters. I know Paul read a few at the December hearing from residents in the North Street area talking about their concerns. So I can submit them to you. I hope you'll read them.
Thank you.
And make sure they enter in as well. I think that's most of what I have to say right now.
Thank you. I need to allow one more because we have to have time for the commission to discuss this. So, sir?
Thank you, sir. My name's Lawrence Tatro. We live at 180 Bridge Street, which is in the Ward 3 area. My wife and I own the house up on North Street. We've owned it for some 34 years. And I'm a native from town, so I probably know a lot of things that some of the people that are here at this meeting tonight, including the board, that probably don't know about that neighborhood. First thing I'd like to ask a question of the board members, Concom. How many of you people have been on site? Have anybody, may I raise a hand, please? So 4 of you have been on site. All right, so what I'd like to bring to your attention about the water table part, because those that have been on site, I'm sure you know about it, I would like to bring to your attention as a homeowner and with basement problems, and we are situated, the North Street houses, on the southern rim of the proposed Cove development. Now, when we bought that house, I couldn't believe the stuff that was in the basement, all rotted. I shoveled the stuff out, filled up a big, huge container that a tractor trailer brought away, and then I hoed a trench. So when water did get in, I could sweep it over to the front of the house, which is the furthest away from the furnace and the heating units. And the mold in there was so bad, when I worked there probably 2.5 weeks cleaning it out. And I remember Mr. Bob Fenton was living on the other side. This is right by the View Avenue house, which you own at the moment, I believe, Agnes Moriarty's house. And I come walking out there, and I had rubbers on, and I was all covered with white and yellow gooey mold, which I broke off dead branches of the hemlock tree side of the property and scraped off my shoes and under my instep. The water table is so high, and that is the high point, because as that development goes from Agnes Moriarty's house, which is at the southern rim of your development, that land slopes backwards. Now back there in her lawn, I've gone there, I've got to be good friends with Agnes, and she let me back there many times. And I've walked there in the spring, and that lawn that you choose to eradicate, I guess, was halfway down to the back to the woods. They would be oozing over my shoes. Now you're talking about the hard pack to the left where the nice white spruce are, and you say it's hard now? Of course it's hard. Those trees are sucking up the water. That's mitigating our water problems for us. If things are built on top of there and squishing everything down, I think all of us, not only North Street, Northern Avenue, going to have sump pumps and plumber problems, and there's a lot of people that are going to be affected with this. Now, just another little touch on this with the herbicides, because of the knotweeds proposal and maybe the multifloral. I like multifloral in the woods because you know what? When you walk through the woods, and I walk a lot, you know what multifloral brings? Bees. We need bees, right? Multifloral's not hurting as far as I'm concerned. Helping the bee colonies, the bee population.
So
what's wrong with that?
So it's knotweed.
And knotweed brings them too. I didn't look at the knotweed, but I always look at the multiflora. But also, with the treatment of this knotweed and what other invasive species that you've so called that are hurting the area, just because it's invasive, but even though it's invasive, it's there and it does provide habitat. I'm touching things that somebody has already mentioned, so I'll leave that. That putting herbicides in there in a wetland area for over a year and then maybe not even killing it then, what does that do to the aquatic life or whatever that aquatic life that's in there? Birds, whatever. This area, I remember talking to neighbors when I was there. I've been in the neighborhood over 40 years, but I'm a native of town, but I've been in that neighborhood for 40 years. And I can remember talking with Mr. Fenton, who's not with us anymore, and a couple of the neighbors, Carl Schwartz and everything. And I said, we talked. What happened? What happened back there? Something. He said, nobody will touch it in their right mind. It's a swamp. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, can I get a motion to close the meeting so that the commission can proceed with our discussion?
I think I wanted to point something out. We're asking not to close the hearing because we were looking for a read tonight on whether we're headed in the right direction with mitigation. We need to run the stormwater calcs for you. And we couldn't do that. We didn't want to do that so many times because it's a pretty complete and thorough process. So we would continue for one more meeting.
And of course, the neighbors would also like the opportunity to see the stormwater calcs.
Right,
and,
which they would get
yeah,
to do it and have them in advance of the meeting, well in advance. So I guess, and the other thing is we did go down and check the plan, and we have till 8:15 to finish this.
You can still discuss it.
I have some things. So you're right. So what extent of discussion among the commission makes sense to do since we're not? We're going to continue further, but I think it's reasonable to expect that there'll be some discussion to provide some guidance about what are issues and what aren't. Paul, you want to start?
Let's see. First, I appreciate the efforts of looking for mitigation and changing some of these stormwater detention basins to be more closely aligned, more natural. It didn't go unnoticed. I appreciate that. But I thought, last time, I thought that the commission said that things should be out of the 35-foot buffer. And so I'm disappointed that everything, I appreciate that this got pulled out and everything, but I still see there are a lot of hydrological aspects of the project that are within 35 feet. And so I think that we should hold to the line. And that includes all the hydrology. Now, if there's a little bit of grading, I'm not going to be so concerned about it, but let's see,
hydrology? What are you referring
All
to?
the detention basins and the,
Bioretention?
yeah, all this. Anyway, so all the constructed, so we just spent, earlier, you weren't here, but we just spent 45 minutes haggling over a boundary line and how to define a wetland boundary for future residents, and whether they would store things like, past that boundary line. And Bruce almost said the exact same thing as Mr. Sewell.
Brilliant minds think alike.
About enforcing covenants and things like that. So I see this, if we hold to the line there, I see that we're basically going into the backyards and the patios of units 11, 12, and 13, and 3 and 4, and possibly 5, and so, and 25, and so I don't think this is a good idea.
Well, and I think actually, in our last meeting, my sense of the meeting was that we did intend to signal that the 35-foot was pretty inviolate, that we weren't sure what extraordinary mitigation might involve, but that we didn't see anything that looked extraordinary. In that vein, since that's the condition under which the ordinance would allow us to go less than 35, we would have to see that the applicant provides extraordinary mitigation, replication, restoration, or open space preservation. And what constitutes extraordinary? When I was out walking with you and afterwards, I was trying to imagine what looked like it might constitute extraordinary. Right now, it looks roughly like the amount of a parcel of land that's wetlands, boundary, and upland, that there's about half of the total parcel being developed, and it's hard to imagine what you could do within that parcel that would feel extraordinary. And so I found myself thinking, well, if given the amount of development, it's just hard to imagine, because extraordinary doesn't seem like, okay, we've developed half and we're going to improve the other half. It doesn't seem extraordinary to me, even if you were to improve all of the existing wetland. And now I realize we don't have any precedents here, so we don't know what extraordinary means, but it's hard for me to assume that, oh yeah, we can allow this to go down to 10 feet, because there are some relatively, compared to the area being developed, relatively small areas of improvement. It just doesn't seem to be justified to go to 10 feet at all. So I would agree with Paul that we got to stay at 35. The ordinance says 35 in this zone, and I don't see any basis for going beyond that.
Can I respond?
Sure.
Basically, when I was listening to you the last time, I can recall what you said, Paul, and I can also recall what you said, Downey. And it was that in terms of extraordinary mitigation, that you could leave open what would happen within 30 feet, 5 feet, depending on the size of the impact within the boundary, and the extraordinariness of the mitigation would be in relation to that. So there is a balancing act between, presumably, the amount of mitigation and some sort of either quantitative or qualitative assessment of, of the mitigation and the area. With respect specifically to the biggest item we have here, which is that bioretention basin, rain garden that's within the wetlands, it's generally considered good practice to locate them near to the wetlands. At least that's the way I've always understood it. So I was looking at that. I mean, listen, it's the biggest chunk of the whole thing to get that out of there. But that was the reason we left it there, despite the fact that it clearly, square footage wise, is a huge chunk of space.
And it's on existing law.
And clearly, what, you know, it's been stated a couple times, this is a small wetlands replication. It's 2,660 square feet. It's not that small.
Oh, well, the replication, the restoration proposals, I'm not gonna say whether they're extraordinary or not, but I don't know, someone mentioned that they were, and Windmiller mentioned that, you know, your restoration might hurt the wetland more than help it. I tend to have a little more of a liberal view on that. It's this wetland, the history of this wetland is pretty sordid. I mean, it started out with ditching it when they were farming it, and the railroad came through and put a track right through it. That's the bike path, and then you know, there's all kinds of things. The city dumping fill and people building around it. Everybody has wet basements because you're in the wetland. That's what it was. That's why we have wet basements. I don't know. And there's lawn. People throw their lawn and stuff down there. That's just the way it is. Anyway, so I'm not so worried about the mitigation being in the buffer. There are a lot of inherent problems with mitigation, just how long you're going to be at it and how much you have to knotweed's going to be, it's an invasive exotic for a good reason. I mean, it's very difficult to take care of. But more, to me, the more important thing is that I think that if you're expecting a neighborhood kind of a situation here, people are going to expand out into these areas. And so essentially, if we want to hold to this line, there are too many units. That's really what it comes down to.
Well, let's talk about the notion that they're going to expand beyond that line, because I understand where you're coming from with it, but I think there's a question about the form of ownership here that I do think is relevant, and that is, this is a condo where we've plotted out what we call exclusive use areas. And those exclusive use areas are marked on that plan. The limit of the edge of the lawn is the end of their exclusive use area. The rest of it is common property. Presumably, if you wanted to, you could fence it off. We could fence it off, and I'd be happy to fence it off to keep that from spreading.
I don't care if people use the wetland. I'm just saying that I don't care if they walk in it, if they hike in it. What they're going to be inclined to do is to mow sections and I mean, I'm just looking at, I mean, you're in their backyard. I mean, you're in their patio. It's going to be, it's just going to be that way. When you do this bioretention, any maintenance, this has to be mowed. It has to be mowed, or annually. Okay, that's not such a big deal, but it's in the buffer.
The rain garden?
Yeah, or whatever. It has to be maintained. It may have to be scraped every decade or something like that. Just assuming that people actually do it. So it just has to be done. So it's going to be disturbed forever, so that's just the way I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Other comments, Gavin?
I mean, I also remember making the comment that there has to be a calculus of disturbance versus extraordinary mitigation. And so, for instance, the grading and outfall for bioretention basin 2, that's a linear intrusion which is covered up and is already underneath a disturbed area where there's a footpath. Again, like Paul, that first bioretention basin is the largest. It's the largest structure within the 35-foot boundary. Addressing Gloria's comment about that's existing lawn, that is something in the short time I've been on the commission that we have not given owners credit for lawn in saying that it's lawn and so it's therefore degraded. Once you open up the project, then that area within the buffer zone, whether it's 50 feet, 35 feet, 10 feet, then it becomes the responsibility of the commission to protect it to the utmost. So you don't measure from lawn to bioretention basin. You measure from intact natural community to bioretention basin. At least that's the way I've heard the comments from the rest of the commission members. Again, with the other consideration for me is that when the ordinance was passed, there were a lot of comments that by placing the 35-foot limit in black and white, that would become the line at which everything would reside.
Right.
And again, I said that in jest, Attorney Seawald, that you were arguing 35 feet. I didn't think you had forgotten that the Wetlands Protection Act protected that to 100. The interests are protected at 100 because that was a convenient number. Again, in the drafting of the wetlands ordinance, there was evidence presented that that's not nearly enough. But again, it's even that is a political compromise. On the other hand, I think Paul is right. This piece of property has a sad biological history. When you look at the topo maps from the late 19th century, in terms of, you can go down there now and watch Milliard Brook flow backwards. So in terms of the interests that are protected, protection of fisheries, not so much. Maybe once upon a time there were brook trout in that stream, probably no longer. Well, I'm saying, think 500 years ago. Okay. But end statement, the structures within 35-foot zone are too significant, and again, to Paul's point, the number of structures within even the 100-foot zone is such that incursion seems to be inevitable. That people will expand beyond the footprint, and again, it's not a question of our intentions, but imagine the worst, the Holmesian bad man was in law school, what we all described. You have to draft rules for the worst actor, for the least responsive landowner, especially if they're supposed to protect a resource that is supposed to last in perpetuity. So.
Is there any way you can condition against incursion further beyond the limit of yard that's shown?
Well, I think that in space prevents incursion.
The earlier case.
I understand that yard waste ends up in any vacant space. We've certainly seen that on this land.
Right. In the earlier case we were discussing, we established minimum distances from edge of wetland to edge of building, and that's what the 35 does. But then we which is why I start with, well, that's a minimum. I mean, I think my interpretation, we as a commission have not seen anything that would allow us to allow incursion in the no encroachment zone.
I mean, just on the yard waste, what I noted on my first visit to the site in the fall was the accumulation of yard waste from the neighborhood residents who have backyards that are dozens of feet long. And yet, in maintaining their lawns, they chose not to compost, not to allow a natural vegetated boundary along the back of their yards. They chose to dump it in the woods. So,
And the wetlands.
and in the wetlands. So, again, this property has a history of being abused, not just by the current proposal, okay, but by the previous inhabitants of Northampton.
We should probably, we'd love to get a cleaner finish on this, but we should probably go to planning.
I just emailed Carolyn to see if the planning board has a half hour to discuss something else, so.
Okay, do?
I'm waiting to hear from them.
Well, then we'll wait. It would be great to get, to get somewhere tonight where we knew, I'm not essentially where we're going, but I'm still, the general sentiment that there's too much here is what I've got. And, you know, it's a fine line between zoning and conservation commission, I realize that. But I'm not sure, at a certain point, we just pull everything out of the 35, what happens then? Because that's not undoable, I mean, it's doable, clearly.
Well, I think the signals are that if there is no disturbance within the 35 feet, then our attention turns to is there risk in the way the layout and the flow of traffic and foot traffic included and so forth, that there will be later incursion into that. And so we'll think about those things. But the statute or the ordinance basically says, hey, at 35 feet in this zone, those are legitimate plans. Does not require special action, extraordinary mitigation in order to allow.
I did want to also respond to what Alan Sewell brought up in the last meeting. And I think it, basically the way I'm reading, and I was looking at the bylaw after this and looking at what had been said here. The subsection big B was really a statement about public policy with the supporting of development in a very general sense. That creates an exemption which is implemented by the specific provisions of Table 1. Table 1 specifies a 35-foot unqualified no-build zone around the wetlands. No special mitigation is stated in that table. If Attorney Sewell wants to argue that it says something different, that's fine, because I think I'm dealing with the mitigation issues between 50 and 35 regardless. I don't mean to rule out his interpretation. I'm simply saying that if you read it as a whole, it struck me as pretty clear. Sit with it for a little while and look at the 10-foot zone, the 35-foot zone. Those are captured within the notion in the first discussion that infill goes to the table mentioned below.
Yes. And
it's accepted from the 35 feet, from the 50 feet, excuse me.
Or can be. The commission may allow.
And you may allow up to 50. That doesn't mean you have to. You have jurisdiction to 100. That's that. The other thing I do want to say something for the record. I don't expect it's going to change any minds here, but I do just want to say it. This is not the first project where something's been placed either 10 or 35 feet from a wetland. We walked in, we looked through a few files. We found, 8 of them where something had gone in between 0 and 35 feet from a wetland. It's not, in my experience, that unusual, especially related to stormwater. It's not usually structures, but when you get into stormwater, you often end up with outfalls that just can't be placed anywhere else. Part of what we did in this last draft was to try to get the outfalls out. But looking forward on this, I suppose we're really looking at these things one by one. Are the two, I guess I'll ask the questions one by one. Is the bike path something, regardless of whatever else you agree to here, is that a plus or a minus for you? Moving the bike path and restoration of those two wetland areas? Or are you just, you'd rather not have anything happen in their period and leave it alone?
No, actually, it's a plus. I think having a path through that well is a great idea.
Okay. So that's
There's already a path through there. I think it's a nice way to get into it, but that's me.
I see skepticism on Down's face.
No, again, a paved path. I spoke to Bruce about this earlier today. An unpaved path during wet periods will be widened because people will avoid the center of the path where the water is ponding. So the footpath will continue to expand. On the other hand, the paved path will mean that it will need to be maintained. So,
That's a drawback. You're
right. I'm
the maintenance part.
Maintenance, regular asphalt does not require maintenance. Unless you've got to go in and recode it.
We're just thinking.
It's 30 to 50 years, you're right, you got to go get it.
But I think having a path is a good idea.
Yeah.
We've got one.
We've got one.
Which
Well said.
is,
It's already there.
It's
There's
there.
the path is there.
It's been
There's
there
a bunch of
for.
paths, yeah.
Yeah.
It hasn't gotten
Oh,
any
well,
wider in the
yeah.
last 30 years.
It's gotten narrower.
Then we'll leave it alone. I have no desire to, go in there and do a whole bunch of work without good cause and good indication that it means
And
something.
apparently some landowner who used to work for the city put some asphalt down there.
Yes.
Go down.
That's correct. With respect to the replication areas themselves, is that something, again, I'm not saying what I'm asking for in return for these things, I'm asking whether these are things that interest you as mitigating measures.
Before you go on to that, I think the planning board is going to request that there's some sort of connection to the bike path with 25 new units coming in,
Separate issue.
and is that a separate issue? Does it matter to Conservation Commission? I don't know, it's your choice, but if you're going to have 25 new units and you already have a neighborhood using it, it seems like in my opinion, a paved path is better than a mud path or a TRG path. They're both going to either get wider or change over time based on water conditions. And a 4-foot wide paved path in an area that's already disturbed seems to make more sense to me.
I disagree based on the fact that if a landowner came to us and proposed to build a paved path within 10 feet of wetlands, that I would think that the
Right, no, I understand, we would tend to be sticky, but in this case where there's a population that is going to get itself access to the bike path, it's a question of how we least disturb the surrounding wetlands.
Right, though there is access along Northern, presumably, or that's the hope.
Does it get muddy now?
You mean that ultimately would get.
Ultimately, that there'd be access along Northern and then a crossing.
It's not the money for that, it's the permission to go and connect to the bike path at the end of Northern. It's a difficult thing to get.
I mean, it seems like a good neighborhood connection to me, and you already have something there that's going to be used. Unless you were to say, dig it up and plant it, which then you're taking away from an existing neighborhood and potentially a new neighborhood. So what you're saying is formalize it, keep it within the confined space of a 4-foot path that's paved, that can be maintained even in the winter. And that provides maybe a safer area for kids to get to a bike path, to get to school, to get to Amherst, whatever they do. It doesn't matter to me either way, however you go. I just think that it's already there, it's already disturbed, and it's already wet. Maybe something formal that has drainage, a sub base, and potentially pervious pavement that water runs through, or slightly crowned or super elevated, if you will, pavement that water runs off of, however it is, angled.
I think in answer to Mr. Cole's question, it's not a compelling issue for the commission.
Conservation.
Right, but I'm pretty sure the planning board is going to request it.
And then it's an interesting question, since you're within 10 feet.
That path.
This is, well, you have this, I'm trying to figure out what to do with this. There is limited project status. So if you go through the wetland, you're fine, you go within 10 feet, well.
Well, you can get a limited project status to cross a wetland to good enough upland portion of your project, and that will allow the commission to waive some performance standards if they so deem necessary.
Okay, I figure there has to be some way to work that out. So again, back to the replication and the increase in the wetlands area.
I don't see the constructed wetland, since it's disturbing existing buffer, as necessarily being a benefit. Unlike some of the commenters tonight, I do regard invasives as invasive. Japanese knotweed does not provide significant habitat. It expands. It's even though it has extensive rhizome roots, it does a poor job holding soil. So again, though the counterbalance is that eradication of these is extremely difficult and requires, I mean, you're signing up for a 10-year project, not a 2-year project. So.
I don't think the comment of saying that the mitigation areas are small and inconsequential, if they were all by themselves, I would agree with that, but they're not. They're next to the well. They're next to the larger space. They actually, there's good reason to, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, are you now talking about the replication or the invasives?
Well, both. I mean, because you're not gonna leave this.
Right.
It's a little bit, to leave something in here is a little bit tricky, but anyway, that's all. Anyway, and I don't, you won't be able to deal with invasives without herbicides. So you just have to, kind of seal your, make your peace with that. If you think that's important enough, you'll need herbicides. You can't deal with it. It just isn't going to happen.
You're not talking about spraying of herbicides.
No, but even if it's just it's going to be a wick application. You have to. You won't. The other alternative is digging up dirt.
It's being done at Fitzgerald Lake.
It's just
it's
not
really
possible.
Sometimes no.
Anyway, but as to the locations.
I think those, is it the sense of the commission that those are valuable contributions that don't,
as long as they're done right,
step to the level of being extraordinary? They're just, if you're going to...
Is it a trade-off for putting your detention basins in that buffer? No, but as long as they're done right, because if they're not done right, you'll waste money and not get the desired outcome. I mean, Mr. Cole has told us before that to him, having this look nicer, which I think he means by more natural rather than kind of invasive and some junk and chairs sitting around, is to his, I mean, that's to his benefit. So, great, I mean, so, the biggest thing is water. Mr. Tatro mentioned that in his final statement, that no one would build back here because it's squishy. Well, I could see that that water could be a problem. I mean, everybody else says it's a problem. I know they don't have basements, but still. So anyway, I move it out.
What out?
You're gonna have to move it out, which means some of these guys are gonna be X'd. Some of these planned units are gonna be X'd because you can't, if you need the space, you're gonna lose, you won't have to have as much detention capacity, but you're gonna have to, if you're gonna move it out of there, you'll have to X some.
Out of where?
Out of the 35 foot.
Out of the less than 35-foot zone on the yard specifically?
Yeah, so that.
I want to be very concrete here, Paul.
Well, I'm just saying that this has to be moved back because
we're looking at Unit 11 there.
I'm looking at Unit 11 and 12 and 13, and then this, of course, this would all be changed if this
with the orientation.
if this bioretention basin had to be put in sort of the upland, then it's going to be changed around. So I'm not going to tell you. X.
So the bioretention can go, Paul.
Yeah,
we don't have to
it's
not going to be there on the next round based on this conversation.
It was to improve water quality. It wasn't for detention.
We can get to meet DEP standards without it, no question.
We thought it was doing
It's nicer to have a planting there rather than a hard structure. We can leave it alone, but it actually creates a buffer to protect the buffer rather than actually a stormwater structure. And it serves the same function. We can get rid of it, put in a proprietary system and eliminate that rain garden entirely.
But then, as long as it's going to need maintenance and all that, I mean, the point is just not to have to go into this area.
Which area?
In the future.
35 feet.
Less than 35, into this,
But, you know, we have in other cases been,
She said that they're
Very-
still dealing with Mr. Harrity, so, yes, there's a little bit of another 15 minutes or so that, before the planning board.
Well, we're getting more valuable information, so I appreciate it.
we've been very vigorous in other cases when there is a line, a limit that says it's a non-encroachment or do not disturb, that we've been rigid about that. And I think that that's the signal that's coming, is that we've got a 35-foot line, which is, as you say, that's what we, that's what we are allowed to do. There isn't anything that's presented here that would allow us to go any closer.
And then let's go to some other specific
So
items.
so the detention basin grading is in there too.
Right.
And
Exactly.
25, you know, all this.
Understood.
there's
All
just
of
a-
that is
so
one.
like Donnie
Disturb,
said,
though.
space is a good buffer.
Understood. Paul, you had mentioned that you had no problem with the road where it goes into 4 or 5 feet past the 35-foot zone. That's a question of right now, because
This one right here,
that
right
simply
here.
makes for a better plan to put it there,
Oh.
you know, but
If
it's
that's
in-
the only thing,
Yeah. And the grading off of that road down
yeah,
to a flat land.
I'm just,
Well,
I don't want, I don't
Said
want,
they have time.
I don't want you to, I hesitate to, I hate these lines. It's a wetland, it's kind of a flowing boundary. It's just, I'd hate to see, that you miss a good opportunity to make a better design because you have to, because you're 1 foot over an imaginary line, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I do.
So it's just that, it's just, there are a lot of places where the proposed building structures and the space that the people will occupy in there are, in my opinion, too close, or over the 35-foot boundary line. So, that little bitty road, I don't know, you know, I mean, as it stands now, it's not a big deal. If you reconfigured this whole thing, it might become a little bit bigger deal, I don't know, I'm not, I don't know what to say about that. I don't wanna be, I don't wanna be quoted directly,
Yeah, no,
you
I
know, you
understand.
told me, oh, this is okay, and so we left
I
it.
don't think,
So
well, I
it's-
think we're gonna go through another round of that. I mean, when they take, I'm a very patient person. It takes what it takes to get to the point where you are comfortable with what you're doing. And there are 4 different opinions at this point, people who are involved in this particular hearing, and or if you vote on it, 5 people as well, you know. Lisa can interject, I assume, if anything you wish to. And so I'm gonna, you know, I won't be surprised if somebody else has a different take on it. If there is another take on it that's clear in your mind, I'd love to hear it now from Sue, Downey, Kevin, Lisa.
Kevin, you mind if I ask a question of the commission?
Sure.
In my staff report, what I wrote was that my suggestion was to move everything out of the 35-foot.
Right.
All lawns, all structures, with the exception of the bioretention basin.
Because that's basically almost a form of wetland.
Because it's somewhat, well, it's a water filtration system similar to a wetland, yes. And if the project comes back,
So why couldn't that bioretention basin be where this detention basin is, and put the detention basin here? So you had that kind of step down.
Because the bioretention filters into the detention and not the other way around.
Not the other way around.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Sorry.
yes. So I'm wondering if well, it's possible that it could be in between maybe 20, 25 and this area here, this detention area, right? You could have a,
You'd seriously reduce the capacity, the volume of the detention basin at that point?
you know, I'm throwing something out here. I'd hate to lose the bioretention basin. We have, as a commission, we have conditioned numerous projects, even small single-family homes. Now, even garage projects to say, all the stormwater coming off of the garage needs to be put into a bioretention, which is basically a rain garden, but slightly different. And Mark probably could fill us in for hours on that. I don't see a problem with it where it is. Maybe there are commission members who do see an issue with that, but I don't want to see it go away. I think that they're valuable. I don't see a problem with it is where it is right now. It's like you said, it's existing lawn, and it's going to. If you use my other suggestion, which is 4-foot stones every 2 feet, although you didn't on the last project, along the entire no disturb area, I don't think somebody's going to mow beyond that. It would be pretty obvious having stones this big.
I mean, at that point, I just say, let me put in a fence that defines, an area.
I don't think the commission wants a fence. I think wildlife will pass between a 2-foot.
But all I'm keeping wildlife out of is a very small pocket yard.
Can I just ask my colleagues on the commission a question? Because if I'm the only one with this concern, then fine. But if it's more generally shared, I think it'd be useful for Mr. Cole. I'm imagining impact on the wetland over time with 25 families is if there is no green space or play area built into the project. To be worrisome. That, as having been a kid,
Most of us have.
That's where I'm going to go, unless there's someplace else. Is anybody else worried about the potential impact on wetland?
I just in terms of what Ruth's saying, I would rather keep the bioretention basin as well, and I understand that one of the issues is when you look at the plan. If you assume that the 25 units and supporting infrastructure have to be there, then you say, oh, there's no space. You can't put it there. And I understand that there's every incentive to maximize the revenue generated by the project, but I don't think that you have to start with that assumption. There's plenty of examples where developers are forced to, in riverfront area type situations, are forced to give up lots, otherwise buildable lots. It's the same issue here. If this structure would benefit, then it still benefits, even if it's outside of 35 feet. And since the jurisdiction of the commission extends outside of 35 feet, in terms of preventing impact on the wetlands, then retaining it may be something that I weigh, and whether to approve the project when you bring it before me, even if everything is outside of 35 feet. I mean, even if everything is outside of 35 feet, the project is still evaluated for its impacts on the wetlands.
Which is the basis of my question about play space.
So when you're
Point
looking
of
for
order,
it more,
can I just-
if I'm looking at it more play space, really? I mean, I don't think this is not.
No,
legitimate. I think
I'm
it's
not talking about. I mean, the issue. I'm talking about both the retention, both in terms of water treatment, saying, oh, we can't get the water treatment inside the 35-foot boundary. Let's just drop it, because that way we'll hit DEP standards. Again, DEP stormwater does not deal with salt. It just doesn't. There's, as far as I know, and you can correct me because you're the engineer, I don't know of any effective treatment options for removing salt, and yet chloride pollution in New England is a very big problem. And I had friends who were at UNH and talked about how basically some areas in New England are becoming brackish water in the volume. Now I understand that this is most of this is municipal application of salt. It's the Connecticut River is not going to become salty because I salt my path. It's because I-91 happens to run alongside of it. But at the same time, the commission can't ignore impacts because they're small. I mean, again, the jurisdiction leads to cumulative impact. So, so I think both in terms of the last project that we looked at, we spent a lot of time talking about how to avoid enforcement issues. And that really is just an issue of space. but then also in terms of working outside that 35-foot boundary, all the interests still need to be protected.
Well, and that's part of the issue I was trying to ferret out, if it exists. Are we concerned about impacts on the wetlands, even if all disturbance is outside of the 35-foot area? Are we still worried about impacts on the wetlands due to the density of the project? And that will take form in various ways. But is there, because if so, then I think that's something Mr. Cole should be aware of. They have to go back and think about, oh, this has got to shrink somehow. If not, if we think, hey, as long as you stay on the right side of the 35-foot line, and all of the stormwater measures seems to meet requirements, then we're not concerned. Then the number of units is not an issue. But I was wondering if I'm the only one, and I'm partly interpreting your question, Downey, as also having to do with density. How many units you put in this area?
Yes.
Kevin?
Just one point, we're talking about, oh, if this is in the 35 foot, within 35 feet, or that is, and how little impact it may have. What I heard here tonight was that not one single commission member found that the extraordinary measures were undertaken in order to allow anything. You have no discretion to allow anything within 35 feet unless you find extraordinary measures under Table 1. And so, having found no extraordinary measures, nothing can be within 30, no disturbance at 35 feet.
I'll parse that right back. What the commission is saying at this point is, A, yes, they certainly don't like the stuff within 35 feet, but underlying that is a broader concern about the project and its relation to the wetlands, not in strictly a linear sense of number of feet to the wetland, but in terms of issues like open space and density. That's
yeah, just to,
and
I don't think that's what the ordinance says.
I think
it is not what the ordinance says.
I think
but it is
both
perfectly
issues have been
reasonable.
raised. That I stated at one point that I didn't see anything that would allow us to go inside 35 feet, because I didn't think I saw anything that, in my estimation, was extraordinary. And that's my personal. I don't know that that's the sense of the entire commission, but that was my view.
There was nobody jumped up and said, well, wait a minute, isn't this extraordinary? Nobody has suggested that anything extraordinary has been proposed here in terms of mitigation, replication, restoration, or open space preservation. And unless that specific finding is made by this commission, you have no discretion to go inside 35 feet.
well, I think if I could just speak for myself, again, I approach the level of mitigation and restoration when I see what's been proposed inside the 35 feet. The two are weighed one against the other. As the project stands before me right now, the amount of incursion inside 35 feet is not outweighed by what Mr. Cole has proposed in terms of mitigation and restoration. Does that mean that I have forever foreclosed work within 35 feet? Absolutely not, because Mr. Cole is going to bring forward another plan which may propose work inside 35 feet and will of course propose restoration and mitigation. I will do the balancing again.
But I think that when you're talking about the term extraordinary, you're talking about a standard that's measured against what generally is done in work done around a wetland. And those two little
Well, that's a question of interpretation that we have not yet resolved. What does extraordinary mean?
But
the discussion was around, one of my suggestions in the staff report was a multi-year invasive removal plan on the entire site. To me, and maybe not to Mr. Windmiller, who seems to think that removal of invasives is a disturbance, but I actually even Googled that and I couldn't find a single wetland scientist to agree with him on that. But to me, removal of invasives across the entire site to bring this entire wetland that's been severely degraded over 5 centuries back to somewhat natural functioning wetland that provides bee habitat and bird habitat with natural native plantings is extraordinary. is beyond extraordinary, to be honest. In my
haven't heard that
opinion, that was my recommendation. I don't know if the commission agrees with me on that, but to bring back
The answer to that is if that would get this project approved, we'd do it.
And you would be there for 10 years dealing with not with the next 10 years.
Bruce, can I clarify that? By that, do you mean that you would take out every non-native tree from the wetland?
I'm not saying non-native, no, I said invasive. They're two separate, very separated distinctions. Every invasive species that's removed from there, from this severely degraded wetland that has garbage and paths and invasives in it, is an improvement to this degraded wetland. The degraded wetland that borders on a stream that runs in two different directions and is been filled by for years from industrial, from commercial, and from residential areas. This would be an extraordinary improvement to that wetland. A long-term plan to remove it, and to not just remove it, but also replace it.
And are you going to police that over the next 10 years that we've heard this project will take?
I think that's a giant net benefit to the city, to the neighborhood.
Are you going to police that over the next 10 years and make sure that gets done?
That's conditionable.
I'm happy
I
to bond
believe
it
it
for
is.
10 years. I have no problem sticking on my projects for 10 years. And I can cite many examples
I
where
think
I
that's
bought
a
back the homeowners'
conditionable.
houses 10 years later to fix things.
That's something we've never had in the city.
Okay.
I think that we've provided Mr. Cole with some useful guidance about the concerns of the commission. Do we have, and we're well past our appointed ending hour.
Move to continue. Second.
I don't want to lose any more people. We've given up on this.
We have a motion to continue to, when's the next meeting, Bruce?
February 12th. If the applicant believes there's enough time. February 26th.
Does that work for you?
February 26th, we have something going on at 5:30, so it'd have to be 6 o'clock.
We're going to
Sure, that's a good.
Yes.
February 26th, 6 o'clock.
Move to February 26th, 6 o'clock.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So voted.
I just want to say, it's